Americans said yes. And then, of course, the corollary to that would be, and then let's make college free, at least state colleges and community colleges. There's a whole video about this over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. You can check it out there. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here. Cindy in Morton Grove, Illinois. Hey, Cindy, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Honored to be on. I've been trying to get on for a few years. Thanks for everything you do. So I have a unique perspective. Earlier, you were talking about that $300 extra unemployment payment. Mm-hmm. So I have a very small business, small brick-and-mortar store in a summer tourist town. So I'm busy 4 months out of the year, summer and Christmas. And we're just going into our 9th year. And finally, at least pre-COVID, the last few an hour, also very low cost of living, and I pay really well at $11.50 to $12.50 an hour. Mm-hmm. But after July 15th, when we reopened after COVID last summer, I couldn't get anybody to come back and work because of this unemployment payment. Mm. I don't understand why they weren't paying that to me, the small business owner, so that I could pass it along to my employees, so that I could stay in business, and they would have that extra money to pay for child care.
That's how they did it.
They wanted.
That's how that is how it was done in all the European countries. I know that's how it was done in Australia. I have a friend who lives there. I know that's how it was done in Israel. There are pretty much every other country in the world made those payments through the businesses. In other words, they supported the businesses and to keep their employees employed, even though they weren't working. And I'm with you on that.
Where we go from here?
Well, where we're going to go from here, Cindy, is that over the course of the next 2 or 3 months, you're going to see that $300 a month bonus, as it were, expires in September. And I would be astonished if it gets renewed. I realize that there will be people pushing to renew it. Bernie has already kind of come out and said, I'm going to lead that. But I would be astonished if that gets renewed. And at that point, it's going to be tight enough to be on unemployment. And Illinois, like I'm pretty sure pretty much every state in the union, limits unemployment benefits now to a certain period of time, to a year, or in some cases, in some states, 2 years. But it's not like you can go on unemployment for the rest of your life. So, you're going to have financial pressure that's going to bring people back into the workplace. And I get that. And, it's just incumbent upon, I think, every business to say, how can we do our business? But, I have no magical answer for you, Cindy, but I get where you're at. And thank you for the call. Johan in Los Angeles. Hey, Johan, what's up?
Oh, you want to talk about that you talked about welfare queen earlier this hour?
Yeah.
I think Republicans are the real welfare queens and crybabies, since they're getting all the millions and billions of dollars from the corporation without doing anything. And they crying foul every time when Democrats or people of the poor try to get something from government.
I do find this logic that the Republicans have really fascinating, that if we give people a social safety net, if you provide people with health care, if you provide them with food stamps, or if you provide them with unemployment benefits, it's going to cause them to become lazy. But if you give benefits to CEOs, if you can help them raise their pay by 30% this year, or you can subsidize their company with a few $1 billion, and they can, give themselves a huge bonus, somehow that makes them work harder. That rich people, when you give them extra money, they work harder. Poor people, when you give them extra money, they work less. It's a bizarre kind of logic that just makes no sense to me at all. So, Johan, thank you. Well said. James in Spokane. James, we have just about a half a minute to the end of the show today. You had a quick comment about World War II?
Well, actually, a couple of historical facts I can fit in here, I think, about corruption in government high office related to the Kennedy assassination. And the 3 years period followed the murder.
James, my apologies. I was off by at least 25 seconds here in my reading of my own clock. Call back anytime this week, and we'll get you back on. James, my apologies. Thanks so much for being with us today, and we'll be back tomorrow, back in the studio again. Kind of reminds me of an old Firesign Theater song, back in the saddle again. Anyway.
They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Club's creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartmann. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
For our Thom Hartmann Book Club excerpt today, we're reading from Ed Morales' new book, Fantasy Island, Colonialism, Exploitation, and the Betrayal of Puerto Rico. This is from the first chapter. There was never any doubt that the United States wanted Puerto Rico for its own when it began a war with Spain near the turn of the 20th century. Cuba had been in the throes of independence war with Spain off and on since 1868, and the conflict that began in 1895 seemed ripe for the United States to capitalize on. The sinking of the USS Maine, an American naval ship destroyed by an explosion while moored just outside Havana, fueled American entry into the war. Although there are conflicting theories about the source of the explosion, including the likelihood it was caused by a spontaneous internal fire, William Randolph Hearst's newspaper chain blew up the incident into the perfect catalyst for the United States to enter the conflict. When Theodore Roosevelt entered the fray with his army of Rough Riders, the whole affair came as no surprise to anyone who'd been paying attention to the lust U.S. government leaders and military had long expressed to expand southward and westward. And although the idea of manifest destiny was at the forefront of the political discourse of this period, it's less often observed that the United States' expansionist gaze was saturated with racial language and attitudes, at once desirous of and repelled by Latin America's mestizo mulatto social dynamic. The Haitian Revolution at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th created a U.S. obsession with both Cuba and Puerto Rico because of the potential of a similar black-led revolt on those islands. In 1826, Virginia Senator John Randolph feared that such a revolt would render the southern United States vulnerable to invasion from Cubans in rowboats. For this reason, he objected to the United States participating in the 1826 Panama Congress because American diplomats would have to endure the horror of a U.S. diplomat taking his seat in the Congress, quote, beside the native African, their American descendants, the mixed breeds, the Indians, and the half-breeds, without any offense or scandal at so motley a mixture, end quote. The logic driving this perspective underlined not only the importance of slavery to the emergence of capitalism in the 19th century, but also, as Matthew Karp points out in this vast southern empire, the extent to which slave owners and their elected representatives disproportionately shaped U.S. foreign policy. Going back as far as the Haitian Revolution, fear of a successful slave rebellion in the newly formed United States strongly motivated Southern politicians. As Karp mentions, to that end, Presidents Madison and Monroe, quote, used overwhelming force to destroy black maroon settlements in southern Florida, end quote. Fear of slave rebellions also briefly united the interests of American slaveholders and Cuban elites who wanted independence from Spain, but in the late 19th century, after abolition, Roosevelt's forces fought in conjunction with Afro-Cuban armies against their common Spanish foe. The move to wrest Cuba and Puerto Rico from Spain came just as Spain had finally relented to end slavery as a concession to black rebel Cuban armies that had formed to push for independence. In a further move to placate continued unrest on the island, in November 1897, Spain signed automatic charters for Cuba and Puerto Rico, which gave limited home rule governments to both islands. Puerto Rico would gain full representation in the Cortes, the Spanish parliament, and could veto Spanish commercial treaties unfavorable to them while also retaining the rights to set tariffs on imports and exports. In this way, Puerto Ricans were granted a kind of citizenship that allowed self-government, grafted on what was left of their Spanish subjecthood. Yet on July 25th, 1898, 8 days after the first meeting of the newly formed Puerto Rican Parliament, U.S. troops arrived in the southern port of Guanica and replaced the Spanish flag with the stars and stripes. This date would be remembered over 50 years later when the United States finally followed through on a project to allow Puerto Ricans to have limited autonomy and self-government. But at the time, it was both the end of Teddy Roosevelt's splendid little war and the beginning of the current quandary over what exactly Puerto Rico's new colonial master would do with the island. Although historians agree that there was no pre-existing plan for designating Puerto Rico's status, there was a general belief that Puerto Rico could be incorporated as a U.S. territory and probably would be. This led many to assume that it would follow a similar path to statehood as former territories like Florida and Louisiana. At the very least, it would, by acceding to military control, receive, quote, the advantages and blessings of enlightened civilization, end quote, as Puerto Rico's first military governor, Nelson A. Miles, declared 3 days after the landing of Guanica. Because Cuba was so militarized during its wars for independence, the United States decided to allow it national sovereignty, thinking it could still exert considerable control over the economy because of existing business interests and a ready-made set of Cuban consumers who were already buying Ford Model Ts. But although Puerto Rico had experienced anti-Spanish uprisings in the mid-19th century, in 1898 they did not have nearly the same level of armed mobilization present. So the United States held on to it, particularly because of its geographic location, which would provide the United States with a stronghold on the easternmost tip of the Caribbean. The book is Fantasy Island by Ed Morales.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Happy Tuesday. Here we are back in the studio, and I just can't get over it. It's been 14 months. We also have, well, there's all kinds of new cool stuff happening, in terms of now that we're back in here and we're kind of upgrading things and updating things. It is great. So we've got a great day today. It's going to be just you and me for the 3 hours, no guests. And I've got a whole bunch of topics that I want to bring up. In the first hour of our program, and I'm going to get into this in just a moment. I mentioned yesterday that the op-ed that I published over at Hartmann Report yesterday was about how the Republicans are trying to raise a new generation of basically white supremacists. And I'm going to get into that in just a moment. And I also want to get into this question of the 9/11 Commission or the January 6th Commission. You know, they're literally cutting and pasting off the 9/11 Commission. And I'll share with you exactly why that is, in my opinion, a terrible mistake. In our second hour, today's piece is up on Hartmann Report about Trump's paramilitaries and how they've turned Republicans either into bullies or into people who are, shall we say, scared crapless, to use the vernacular. But there are things that Democrats can do to fight back, and the question is, will they? And if they fail to, will our democracy survive? We'll get into that in our second hour. And also in the second hour, I want to talk about the CDC revoking the new mask rule. I'm increasingly of the opinion that Biden gave them too much latitude or got too hands off, that CDC decisions during times of pandemic are political decisions and therefore should have had input from the political, basically the president and his advisors and the vice president. But we'll get into that in the second hour of the program. And in the third hour of our program, there's an amazing news study about how Trump supporters share the same narcissistic traits that Donald Trump has. And we're going to get into that. So we've got a lot coming up today. Plus, crazy alerts and your phone calls and all that kind of stuff. Our phone number, of course, 202-808-9925. But I want to start out with this question. Is the Republican Party actually working all across the country to intentionally raise a whole brand new generation of basically racist right-wing crackpots? I mean, just imagine if hardcore crazies like Marjorie Taylor Greene ran most of the school boards across the country. Just think about that for a moment, It's like, this is actually the Republican Party's current plan, and they're gaining some real traction with this. They have been looking for a bigoted wedge issue for 2021. I mean, they have been searching for a wedge issue for 2021. For a while they thought, and we talked about this on this program a few weeks ago when they were rolling these things out. For a while, number one, they were like, oh, well, actually, let me back up a little bit. The problem they're having is that Joe Biden is a white guy. He's about as a white guy as you can get. Right, and he's spent his career being a white guy, and he's never really been, a social justice warrior or any of that stuff. I mean, he's been reasonable and good on civil rights and things, but they're having a hard time getting their base freaked out about a white guy in the White House. So I mean, it's not like he's Obama, right? So first, they tried rolling out this, and we saw all this. If you didn't catch right-wing media, all you had to do was catch Jen Psaki's, discussions in the daily White House briefings, where she would call on the right-wing reporters, and they would come out and say, well, here's what we think. And one of the questions was, is this the third term of the Obama administration? Because actually Kamala Harris is running things. Now, what's the association between Kamala Harris and Barack Obama? They didn't work together. Well, I suppose arguably they served together in the. Actually, I don't even think they served together in the Senate. Kamala Harris wasn't in the Senate by the time Obama left the Senate. So, like, what's the association? Whoa, they're both black people. Oh, that's it. So, and they tried this. Kamala Harris is really, pulling the strings thing. That didn't work. The third term of the Obama administration didn't work. They rolled all these things out on Fox News and right-wing hate radio, and, it's all over the dial, but it just didn't crank up the base. I mean, it cranked up a few, but nowhere near enough to win an election with. So then they tried, the whole. It must be Susan Rice, another black woman who Biden just put in his administration. Must be Susan Rice who's really running things. That didn't fly either. I think, frankly, most of their followers don't even know who Susan Rice is. But what's really, I mean, they've tried these things, and now what they've found, the one thing that they can do that actually gets white voters in the suburbs to show up at events and yell and scream and make noise and get it in the newspaper and all this kind of stuff is school board meetings and schools in general, public schools, where there is the possibility that we will be discussing race, that there will be a discussion of the history of race in the United States, the Holocaust committed by white people in this country against Native Americans, the largest genocide in the history of the world, and against people who had been brought here against their will from Africa and then enslaved for several hundred years on this continent by white people. And, any discussion about that, total freak out. Just a total freak out. I mean, this goes back to 1954 in Brown v. Board. And it really started, this whole thing about not teaching civics in schools, this really started with Bill Bennett. And Bill Bennett is the guy, Sean, if you can play the 360, Bill Bennett is the guy who famously said that this is the guy Ronald Reagan put in charge of our education department. He was Secretary of Education, and he gutted civics education. Why? Well, this may be a clue if it works. It's not working.
But I do know that it's true that if you wanted to reduce crime, you could, if that were your sole purpose, you could abort every black baby in this country and your crime rate would go down.
That was Bill Bennett, Reagan's Secretary of Education, right? Honest to God. And it's so nice being back in the studio where I can play these clips. So now we have this relatively uncontroversial piece of legislation. Tom Cole, the Republican from Oklahoma, and John Cornyn, the Republican from Texas, Republican senators, they signed on to this piece of legislation to appropriate $1 billion, right, chump change, $1 billion to give to schools around the country to help teach civics. And oh my God, you'd think that a nuclear bomb was about to go off. You'd think that a whole brand new variety of terrorists were about to be unleashed. And in school boards all across the country, people are freaking out. What? You're going to undo what Bill Bennett did back during, when he was Reagan's Secretary of Education? We can't have that. I mean, this is really, this is their new thing. Michelle Goldberg pointed out in the New York Times, this was a couple days ago, that in one particular town where this Republican suburbs, where they were going to start teaching just history, right? Just black history. She said that election drew 3 times the ordinary number of voters, with right-wing white people, in my phrase, opposed to the so-called cultural competence plan, quote, dominated winning 2 school board seats, 2 city council seats, and the mayor's office. Hang on.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Won those positions by 40 points each. The Republicans showed up for the school board. I mean, this is just incredible, right? I mean, it's like, what do they have? What can Republicans use? What can Republicans do to reliably crank up their base? Well, the Republican base, ever since Richard Nixon's Southern strategy in 1968, following 4 years after the passage of this Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, the Republican base has been what used to be actually half of the Democratic base, the old so-called Dixiecrats, the Strom Thurmonds, AKA white racists in the South. Well, now, they're scattered all over the country. I mean, they've always been scattered all over the country, but now they're gaining political power in many of the ways that they're scattered around the country. So they're just flailing. Anyhow, James in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, James, thanks for listening to KBCS. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I heard you talking about the school board meetings and regarding education. I'm trying to get everybody to listen to Trump's September 17th speech regarding education. It will curdle your blood.
Okay, tell me about it.
Well, just what you're saying. He's getting right into dumbing down the population, especially regarding anything negative that's happened in U.S. history. I mean, anything negative. It was ridiculous. Was this an actual read it off the prompter speech, or was this just one of his rants at one of his rallies? Yes, it is, and you can pull it up, and I don't know exactly how all my friends have been doing it, but you can pull it up and you can get it September 17th, 2020.
Okay.
Last September.
But like I said, was this a prepared speech that he read? In other words, was this did this come out of some kind of policy discussions in the White House, or was this just some crazed rant he went off on during a rally?
No. This was a prepared speech that he read. It was very direct. It was a speech. It was not some rant.
Huh. 17. Sean, can you make a note? 17th. September 17, please. I don't have a pen here, or I do, but I can't get to it easily and quickly.
Pull that up and play it back, and I guarantee anybody with a rational mind, it will scare the pants off you.
Yeah. Do you recall the main points he made, James?
Yes. Do not teach things that will make our children scared about our country.
See, that's an interesting take, and it's a somewhat different take than the one that typically is used now in the school boards, which is by teaching the bad things that America has done in the past, you are teaching children to hate America, and we don't want to do that because that interferes with patriotism.
That's exactly what this speech was.
Oh, really? So he was making that point too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Word for word, he just about got all of it. And it's not real long, of course, but I guarantee you it will scare you.
I will have to go off in search of that, James. I appreciate the heads up, the tip, and I can one of the nice
17th.
Yeah,
you can play it back for Halloween. It'll be a big hit.
Okay, thank you, James. Yeah, one of the nice things over at HartmannReport.com is that I can edit articles that I wrote weeks ago. This was one that I just wrote yesterday, but I can go in and add that once I've vetted it to that article, which should be great. Anyhow, we'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. In addition to the free newsletter that we have over at ThomHartmann.com, which gives you literally a link to every story or article I've talked about throughout the day, every day, comes into your email box every day, there's no charge. In addition to that, and my daily rants, which are free of advertising and free of charge over at HartmannReport.com, we also produce a weekly video. This week's video is about how power companies around the country, for-profit power companies 100% of the time, these power companies around the country are making it harder and harder and more expensive for people to install solar in their homes. All kinds of ways of trying to block people from doing this. And increasingly, they're getting support from Republican politicians, both at the local and the state level. It's something that we really need to know about, we need to be paying attention to, and we need to be aggressively pushing back on. You can check it out over at thomhartmann.com and at hartmannreport.com. Welcome back. 21 minutes past the hour. So number one, as I said, there's this whole bizarre the whitening of our public education stuff, right? And in fact, in Oklahoma, the governor of Oklahoma, Republican Governor Kevin Stitt, just signed HB 1775 into law. This is a law that explicitly restricts the teaching of critical race theory in the state and bans mandatory diversity training. Right. So now it's not just local school boards, it's entire states making it illegal to teach about the history of America. So I put that before you for comment. Your thoughts on how we can most effectively push back against this. The other point that I wanted to make this morning, and then I'll pick up your phone calls here after the break at the bottom of the hour. But the other point, and I think it's a really important one, is about this so-called January 6th commission. Kevin McCarthy is coming out, the House Minority Leader, coming out and saying, I'm not in favor of this. And of course, he doesn't want to have to testify that he was on the phone to Trump during January 6th, during the siege, begging Trump to call off his shock troops, his stormtroopers, his paramilitaries. And Trump said, I guess they're more concerned about the election than you are, Kevin, or words to that effect. But I agree with Kevin McCarthy that we should not have a 9/11 commission. And here's why. The Democrats, I saw two different Democrats yesterday on television talking about how they're putting together this commission. And they said, we are, literally copying and cutting and pasting from the 9/11 commission, from the legislation that created the 9/11 commission into our legislation that would create a January 6th commission. Literally cutting and pasting. Well, the 9/11 commission, just think back to 9/11 for a minute. A year before George W. Bush ran for president in 1999, he told his biographer, Mickey Herskowitz, that, in fact, I can play this for you on my 360. I've got it again. This is what George W. Bush, this is Cindy Sheehan, whose son, Casey, died in the Iraq War, the illegal Iraq War. So, you recall Cindy Sheehan. She and I stood outside George W. Bush's gated community with bullhorns yelling killer at him. There's pictures of that floating around the internet someplace. But anyhow, here's what George W. Bush said before, as he was contemplating a run for president.
As a matter of fact, in interviews in 1999 with respected journalists and longtime Bush family friend Mickey Herskowitz, then Governor George Bush stated, "One of the keys to being seen as a great leader is to be seen as commander-in-chief. My father had all this political capital built up when he drove the Iraqis out of Kuwait, and he wasted it. If I have a chance to invade, if I had that much capital, I'm not going to waste it. I'm going to get everything passed that I want to get passed, and I'm going to have a successful presidency," end quote. There you go. And so here, we now know that Bush planned to invade Iraq illegally, and number one. Number two, that with regard to 9/11 itself, which was the theoretical basis for the invasion of Iraq, with regard to 9/11 itself, Sandy Berger, who was the national security advisor to President Bill Clinton and Vice President Al Gore, on this program, Sandy Berger came on this program and said, I told Condoleezza Rice, who was the incoming national security advisor for George W. Bush, and I know from personal knowledge that Al Gore told Dick Cheney and that President Clinton told George W. Bush, the incoming president, that their number one security priority should be Osama bin Laden because he was determined to attack us inside the United States.
And then, of course, there's the August 6th, 2001 memo where the CIA flew a guy down to Crawford, Texas to tell Bush that. None of that stuff made it into the 9/11 report because the way that they constructed the 9/11 Commission was, we're not going to look back at our own previous failings. We're only going to look at what happened. And maybe the CIA and the FBI should talk better. So they set it up in advance so it wouldn't look bad for a Republican. I guarantee you they'll do the same thing with the January 6th Commission. The whole idea of a bipartisan commission, in my opinion, is nonsense. You cannot trust Republicans. And if they're half of the commission, and if you're getting Republicans to help, to agree to this legislation to make this thing happen, you're going to have another cover-up just like the 9/11 Commission, which covered up Bush's complicity in, number one, allowing 9/11 to happen, and number two, then using it to lie us into a war with Iraq, which had nothing to do with 9/11. So I'm skeptical, shall we say. In fact, I'm outright opposed to a January 6th commission, at least the way they're talking about doing it now. I think the January 6th needs to be investigated by the Department of Justice, by career prosecutors, or we need to appoint a special counsel. Commission, screw the commission. Get a special counsel, prosecutor.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And that special prosecutor should be looking into how the Trump administration actually encouraged January 6th.
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, a.k.a. brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. For our video this week for supporters of our program, you can find it over at ThomHartmann.com. We're talking about endocrine disruptors as modulators of obesity. This is, in fact, the title of the article in Cell Endocrinology was Endocrine Disruptors as Obesogens. Why is it that almost 1/3 of Americans are obese? And that's not true of, say, Italians. And it turns out there's actually a single measurable, definable variable. There's a category, or actually several broad categories of chemicals that are found in the American food supply in particular places, and therefore fairly easy to avoid, that actually disrupt our endocrine system, our hormone system, and cause us to crave more food, to eat more food, and also downregulate our metabolism so that we burn less energy so that food gets stored as fat. You can check it out at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and
you know that you're wrong, but you fear you're right.
You suspect you're out of sync. You think that you're out of your mind.
Everything you know is wrong.
Everything you know is wrong, as the Firesign Theater says. Well, yeah, here we go. TikTok users are now claiming that the unvaccinated are going to inherit the earth, because all of us who got vaccines, which is why Sean and Nate and Joyce and I are all here, sitting here in the studio now. All of us who got vaccines are going to be dead within a couple of years because I am Optimus Prime, says this voice in this TikTok message, and I send this message to any surviving Autobots taking refuge among the stars. We are here. We are waiting. It's like, Scientology meets, I don't even know what you would call it. It says Scientology means crazy, except that, it's kind of like, that's like, saying crazy means crazy. But these two memes, there's two principal memes now that are floating around Facebook, around TikTok. Facebook's actually done or at least is attempting to suppress this kind of stuff. But TikTok seems to be embracing it and actively feeding this content, according to this article over at Vice.com. It's titled, Unvaccinated TikTok Users Believe They Will Be the Lone Survivors. And some of the claims say that the people with the vaccine are going to die in 3 years is a generous estimate. And others just, say, oh, the vaccines are not real vaccines. These are experimental treatments. Right. Okay. A lot to talk about, a lot that we've gotten into here today. Lloyd in Framingham, Massachusetts. Hey, Lloyd, what's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to us on SiriusXM.
Thank you, Tom. As always, a great show. I've been listening to you for I don't even know how many years.
Thank you.
You're really terrific. I want to talk to you about the commission or proposed commission. I'm 65 years old now, and I'm a born New Yorker, grew up in Jersey, and in my lifetime, there are two commissions that have been a complete fraud. One was the 9/11 Commission, and one was the Warren Commission.
I agree on both.
They complete frauds. I grew up watching those buildings be built, the World Trade Center, and to see them, my brother was an employee actually until 2 weeks prior to them being blown up, and I thought he was actually still there. And anyway, that's not why I called. I called about the commissions. I don't care what the Republicans think or do on this issue or any other issue. As a Jewish American, I see the Republican Party as a Nazi party at this point, and just a continuation of what you always talk about, the 1600s and, group of guys on horseback, white guys chasing after
manifest destiny
and property.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, the whole thing. That's how I see them. So I don't really care what they think.
Ditto.
I want the Democratic Party, like they did in the early 70s, and the one thing that did work during my lifetime is Watergate, with what you just mentioned before the commercials, a special prosecutor.
Exactly. That's how we got Nixon.
Exactly.
Archibald Cox.
That's what I want to see. That's what I want to see. I want to see the elected officials of this country do the hard work, do the research, do what has to be done constitutionally, and do it.
Yeah.
And not a commission not responsive to the people of this country.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that everybody should be calling their member of Congress, 202-224-3121, and telling them, we don't want a commission, we want a special prosecutor, or whatever the modern version of that is. The special prosecutor law has expired, and I think the independent counsel law has expired. But, they can always pass another one. It might get blocked in the Senate, who knows. But, that's what we want. We want an actual serious investigation. You had Archibald Cox in 1974 investigating Richard Nixon, and that brought about the end of the Nixon administration.
Archibald
you had Lawrence
Cox, Leon Jaworski,
Yep.
Peter Rodino, all those guys.
Yeah, well, yeah, but Cox was the investigator. The rest of them, those guys were in Congress. And then in 1992, we had, well, actually, it started in 1987. In 1987, Lawrence Walsh was appointed special prosecutor to look into Iran-Contra, into whether, the Bill Casey and the Reagan campaign back in 1980 cut a deal with the Iranians to hold the hostages to make Jimmy Carter look bad so that Ronald Reagan would get elected president. And that commission was on the verge of making indictments. They had already gotten 3 convictions Oliver North was one of them, by the way.
That's right.
Casper Weinberger was another. They had already gotten 3 convictions, and they had 2 more people who were queued up. And Lawrence Walsh had just subpoenaed George Herbert Walker Bush, the president,
That's right.
who they had just subpoenaed his diaries from the 1980 election. And those diaries would have nailed him as being complicit in that. At this point, Reagan was senile and Alzheimer's and not even responsive. So they had given up on going after Reagan, but they were looking at Bush really seriously. And so what did George Herbert Walker Bush do? This was 6 or 8 weeks after he lost the election. This was December 24th, 1992. He lost the election. Bill Clinton's going to be president in about 8 weeks or 6 weeks, whatever it is. And he asks his attorney general, a guy by the name of Bill Barr, what should I do? How do I avoid this special prosecutor, Lawrence Walsh? And Bill Barr said, pardon everybody, and nobody will be able to testify against you. And that's what George Herbert Walker Bush did. He pardoned everybody on December 24th, 1992. Go into the New York Times Wayback Machine and just look at the headline. Screaming, a 6-column headline. Prosecutor assails cover-up. Bush pardons Weinberger, stops Weinberger investigation, et cetera.
Completely right.
And
completely right.
And that's how he got out of it. And I don't think that President Biden is going to pardon anybody to avoid Donald Trump looking bad. So
let me say one more name,
Yes, sir.
and I'll go. The late great Congressman Henry Gonzalez.
Yeah.
Who was nailing it against the wall on Iran-Contra.
You're right.
He was one of the best.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Lloyd,
All
thanks
right.
for the call. I got to move along, but spot on. Dennis in Aptos, California, you wanted to talk about the education rant that I started with. Do I have that right?
Yeah, you do, although I'm flexible. But yeah, I taught for 20 years, and I'm a liberal Democrat progressive. And yet there was always I worked at about 6 different schools, and there were always a small, very vocal minority of Republican conservative teachers. And, at times we had to review textbooks. And this is the last time I can remember very well. It was in around 2007, I believe. And this one teacher really objected to the fact that there was a whole paragraph about Nancy Pelosi becoming the first female speaker of the House.
Oh, horrors. Horrors.
Yeah.
Where are my smelling salts?
Yeah, and then, he went on well, there's too much in here about, the women's rights movements of the 70s and 80s. And, just that kind of, this makes American history look bad. I saw pockets of that kind of resistance here and there. Switching, though, I couldn't agree with you more about this, what are they going to call it, the 1-6-21 Commission. I hope it doesn't happen. And the reason is because, unfortunately, you're going to have, again, with Pelosi and these spineless Democrats, they're going to allow these Republicans who are on the committee to say, well, let's look into Black Lives Matter and Antifa. They're going to make that the focus. Not what their ilk did on January 6th.
Well, and these commissions go in with predicating assumptions. The Warren Commission, the predicating assumption was that Castro was responsible for killing Kennedy. So they had to cover up anything that might have pointed in that direction, because the American people then would have demanded a response which would have caused World War III. That's what Lyndon Johnson believed. That's what he told Earl Warren. That's why Earl Warren walked out of the office with tears streaming down his face in that iconic photograph. When Johnson talked Warren into creating the commission. And of course, the 9/11 Commission was done, the predicating assumption was, this is not our fault. This was not George W. Bush's fault. This was not Dick Cheney's fault. Maybe there were errors made by low-level functionaries, but this was not anything that happened at the level of politics in America, which of course was wrong. And we'll have a predicating assumption for this one well, maybe this was caused by black people and Black Lives Matter. Dennis, thank you for the call. Spot on. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
It's 45 minutes past the hour. Back with more of your calls and the news of the day. in just a moment. And welcome back. Sandra in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Sandra, what's on your mind today?
Oh, I was just hearing some of your earlier callers, and I have to agree. I think a commission is the worst idea because it will go on for years. Everyone will have forgotten anything that it was about, and it'll all be watered down to the point that it won't mean anything. But my thought was the whole point of civics is to teach how this government, how this country works, and the mistakes it makes. And so many examples are out there by Nixon, Reagan, the Bushes, Trump. I mean, there's been Democrats that have made mistakes too.
Well, hey, you know, Lyndon Johnson and the war in Vietnam.
Yeah, and there's so many that they could use those as teaching moments of here's what they did, here's what you need to recognize for the future should it happen again.
What's the old saying? Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it?
Exactly. And Republicans are so guilty of so much that maybe people will begin to realize, wait a minute, if I side with these people, I'm just as bad as they are, and look what they've done.
Yeah. It is. So, it is problematic is the wrong word. Just the idea that and I mean, just think for a minute, Sandra, that this goes back to the 1980s. I mean, this has been a 40-year campaign to prevent our young people from learning about how their government works and the history of the United States. Literally a 40-year campaign, kicked off by the guy who said that we could end crime in America by aborting all the black babies or reduce crime. Yeah. And they're still doing this. They're still going on with this, and it still activates and motivates their base. And it's still, you know, widely unknown. I mean, this is not something they talk about much on the media. I mean, you might see it occasionally on some of the shows on MSNBC, but it's just not covered. Sandra, I got to move along, but thank you for the story, and thanks for the call. It's great to hear from you. Cindy in Houston, Texas. Hey, Cindy, what's up?
Hi. Well, as I sat here and listened to your show today, to me, I woke up this morning and I saw an article that came out, and it's talking about Heritage Foundation. Have you heard of Heritage Foundation before?
Oh yeah, I've been there.
Okay.
I used to be next door to there.
Okay. Well, this article is on Mother Jones. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but the article is Dark Money Group brags about writing the GOP voter suppression bills across the country.
Oh, yeah.
And so as I sit here and I listen to you, if you follow the problem that we're having in our country, our congressmen, our congresswomen, they are being paid by the lobbyists, and these lobbyists are out there, and they're having to write these bills. They're having to create these bills so that they can get what they want. So in all reality, today, our country is not a democracy. It's an oligarchy. And the thing is that people need to truly understand what's going on, because these dark money groups, Heritage Foundation, they have others working underneath them. And it's just kind of scary when you get out there and you see everything that's happening. The voter suppression law in Georgia, that was their main one that was. And
they wrote it.
They're doing it. Yes.
Or helped write it.
Yes, exactly.
And they're writing them for other states. Oh, yeah. You know, this network that Charles and David Koch created now has more employees and a larger budget and more offices than the entire Republican Party. And yet they're never reported on. This is the tail that is wagging the dog of the Republican Party, Cindy. And you nailed it.
You know what? And the more that you get out there and talk about it, the more that I can do to help people understand, the better we're going to get.
I'll stay on it. Cindy, thank you. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. We're trying to provide the very best content that we can for you at Hartmann Report and over at ThomHartmann.com. And on Hartmann Report, every day, 6 days a week, I write an op-ed. Very often they're my rants, also for the radio and television program.
And it's ad-free, commercial-free. It's free. You can sign up. It'll get pushed into your email box. Check it out at hartmanreport.com. And, of course, over at thomhartmann.com, we have our weekly video that we put up every week that does a deeper dive for people who are members of our program of thomhartmann.com. And the one this week is about this Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR, their new report that almost 20 million Afghans are on the verge of starvation and nobody's talking about it. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Hey, I wanted to say something about this Axios article. When Trump was right after January 6th and right before Joe Biden was sworn in.
Oh, what I was talking about yesterday about how he was trying to basically pull our troops out of every country that, in my opinion, he had been told to pull our troops out of. Yeah. Like Germany.
But it's really, really important in my opinion. And why is it important? Because we are still very much on the cusp of fascism, and that article proves it. Look, that whole article kind of makes Douglas McGregor seem retired colonel, green to gray. I've worked with so many of them. All right, it kind of makes him seem like the hero. But he is not. Okay, he is a lot like from the school of Mike Flynn, who I've known for 30 years. He's I heard it from this Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Lohmeyer.
You've known Mike Flynn for 30 years, Dave?
Yeah, as a subordinate.
Wow.
Now I want to make that clear. Not as a general, okay? But because that goes to my point. All right, look, Mike Flynn is not dumb. I'm guilty because I've said he's a flake. I've said he's not the brightest guy. That's how other generals look at him. Compared to Trump, Mike Flynn is a genius, okay? Yeah. I mean, I guarantee it. And they are not going to make this mistake again, Tom. All right, this Douglas McGregor was not the hero. He's the same way. Yeah. All right, and he's like Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Lohmeyer.
I get it all. Dave, can you please make your point?
All right, my point is this: if you're against racism, they are going to call you a Marxist. Okay, they truly believe it. These are true believers. Well, Tom, I mean, all right. Let me put it this way. I'll make my point. I'm an atheist. Okay, if I was a praying man like you, I see the challenges Joe Biden has, and I see how close we are to fascism. I would say this, as an atheist, even. Pray for our president.
Yeah. Oh, I'm with you. We need to be doing everything we can to support not just President Biden, but the entire Democratic Party right now, and the people who are working within the party to try to make it better and to make it work better. Dave, thank you for the call. Margie in Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin. You wanted to talk about the Andrew Brown press conference. I caught a part of that this morning, and it sounds like basically they're saying, yeah, shoot the guy in the back, no big deal. He was a drug dealer, don't you know?
Oh, it's more horrific than that.
Tell me about it.
You want a comparison to the Republican Party? Take a look at them being able to storm the Capitol and walk away and have people call them a bunch of peaceful tourists staying within the stanchions, and then watch the video that was shown of the execution of this person, which the DA is refusing to make any charges. Yep. 5 cops armed to the hilt, plus 2 others, jumping out of the back of a pickup truck, storming up to this guy, screaming profanities, him trying to back away, and that's justification for his murder. And the DA actually did say that any vehicle is a deadly weapon. Yeah. So that if you are sitting in a vehicle, the cops have perfect right to murder you.
Right, because you have control of a deadly weapon, just like they have control of a gun. Yeah, the logic in this is obscene, and this is another example. You had the white guy who was one of the guys who stormed the Capitol, who was told that he couldn't have guns anymore, and he's on home arrest.
and he goes out and he kills a mountain lion, 140-pound mountain lion, and posts it on Facebook like, look at me, how proud I am. I have my gun back. Well, when he's not even supposed to. I mean, this is white privilege on parade, right? But a black guy dealing drugs who's like, running away. It's crazy.
They went in there to murder him.
Yes.
Watch the video of them getting out.
Oh, it looks
their
like an
vehicle.
execution. Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree. I'm with you, Margie. Michael in Fallbrook, California. Hey, Michael, what's up? We just have a minute.
Sir, I want to make 2 points. Yes, I want to make 2 points. One, I'm an adjunct professor, and I'm also a federal agent in the federal government. I won't say which one. But the point, I teach public administration, and I teach master-level courses, and the amount of education that I have to give the students on basic civics. And remember, they're learning about public administration. They're administering in the United States.
These are college students.
These are college students, master-level college students. I'm an adjunct professor, master-level and undergraduate-level college students, and I've seen the same theme across the board. As far as my experience as a federal agent, one of the things that has been occurring in the federal government, and I can tell you I work in the agency that deals with security clearances and getting people clearances in the government, and what we have noticed is, yes, and we have implemented this process called continuous evaluation, which basically means I am subject to evaluation of my clearance on a continuous basis. I have my credit run on it used to be every 5 years. Because I have a top secret SCI clearance, but now it's almost all the time. They run my clearance. They run criminal background checks on me regularly, and they do clearance checks, and financial checks.
Michael?
I think that's something we should institute for police across the board.
I'm with you. I'm absolutely with you. Yes, that is brilliant, Michael. Thank you. Brilliant points. Both your points. There's a failure. Okay, up next, Trump's paramilitaries and the CDC. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today is The Poisoned City, Flint's Water and the American Urban Tragedy by Anna Clark. This is from the prologue. On a hot day in the summer of 2014 in the Civic Park neighborhood where Pastor R. Sherman McCathern preached in Flint, Michigan, water rushed out of a couple of fire hydrants. Puddles formed on the dry grass and splashed the skin of the delighted kids who ran through it. But the spray looked strange. The water was coming out dark as coffee for hours, McCathern remembered. The shock of it caught in his throat. Something is wrong here. Something had been wrong for months. That spring, Flint, under the direction of state officials, turned off the darkening water that it had relied on for the drinking water that it had relied on for nearly 50 years. The city planned to join a new regional system called the Carragnondi Water Authority. And while it waited for the KWA to be built, it began bringing in its water from the Flint River. McCathern didn't pay much attention to the politicking around all this. He had enough to worry about with his busy parish. But after the switch, many of his neighbors grew alarmed at the water that flowed from their kitchen faucets and shower heads. They packed public meetings, wrote questioning letters, and protested at City Hall. They filled clear plastic bottles in their taps to show how the water looked brown or orange and sometimes had particulates floating in it. Showering seemed to be connected with skin rashes and hair loss. The water smelled foul. A sip of it put the taste of a cold metal coin on your tongue. But the authorities said everything was all right and you could drink it, so people did, McCathern said later. Residents were advised to run their faucets for a few minutes before using the water to get a clean flow. But as the months went by, the city plant tinkered with treatment and issued a few boil water advisories. State environmental officials said again and again that there was nothing to worry about. The water was just fine. Whatever their senses told them, whatever the whispers around town, whatever Flint's troubled history with powerful institutions telling them what was best for them, this wasn't actually hard for people like McCathern to believe. Public water systems are one of this country's most heroic accomplishments, a feat so successful that it's almost invisible. By making it a commonplace for clean water to be delivered to homes, businesses, and schools, we have saved untold lives from what today sound like antiquated diseases in a Charles Dickens novel: cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever. Here in Flint, it was instrumental in turning General Motors, founded in 1908 in Vehicle City, as the town was known, into a global economic giant. The advancing underground network of pipes defined the growing city and its metropolitan region, which boasted of being home to one of the strongest middle classes in the entire United States. McCathern is a tall, bald man with a thin mustache and a scratchy rasp in his baritone voice. At the time of the water switch, he had led the non-denominational Joy Tabernacle Church for about 15 years. It was founded in the YMCA in downtown Flint, where it held baptisms in the swimming pool. But in 2009, it made a home in Civic Park, where a Presbyterian church closed after 85 years and gave its sanctuary over to the young and hopeful congregation. By then, Civic Park, one of America's oldest subdivisions, was a desert of deserted, historically significant homes, the pastor said. Built between 1917 and 1919 by General Motors and DuPont and Company, along curving tree-lined boulevards, the tidy houses were designed for Flint's auto workers and their families. But over the years, the neighborhood was blighted by vacancy. Empty 2 stories with lurching front porches and crumbling roofs sat alongside crisply painted homes where Flint residents, they sometimes call themselves Flintoids or Flintstones, still live their lives. When the sound of gunshots on the street outside interrupted services, McCathern gave a nod to the church musicians, urging them to play louder. Some called Joy Tabernacle a thug church, he said, but McCathern saw the good. The young men filling his pews built a proud society, if not by getting their names on the honor roll, then by tagging their names with spray paint. In the end, people just want to be seen. The ghosts of the past went well beyond Civic Park. Between General Motors and the United Auto Workers, the city had been a flourishing hub for American innovation. There were more than 100 different manufacturing establishments in town. 10 of them employed at least 1,000 people each. And they not only made automobiles, but paints, varnishes, tools, dyes, cotton, textiles, and a wealth of other products. Flint had one of the highest per capita incomes in the entire nation. And despite being severely segregated, it was a magnet for African-American migrants from the South. When Vice President Hubert Humphrey stopped by during the campaign for the 1964 presidential election, he praised Flint for, quote, zooming ahead with unbelievable growth and progress. Workers earned wages that are very good, Humphrey said, and, quote, because of the great labor management program in the community over many years, there has been a constant rise in the standard of living, end quote. Away from the assembly lines and the executive suites, the people of Flint felt that the city just shouldn't be a place to work. It should also be a place to thrive. Charles Stewart Mott, an auto pioneer who became GM's single largest stockholder and three-term mayor, created a nationally renowned community schools program that provided education, skills-building workshops, and social influence and social services. The book, The Poison City. Assaulted, raped, beaten, and left for dead.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the second hour of our program. Thom Hartmann here with you. Trump's paramilitary bullies have basically turned Republicans into either bullies themselves, or has brought out the bully base, or they've left the rest of the Republican Party just scared out of their minds, shall we say. I use a somewhat less appropriate word, but I was quoting Meghan McCain, actually. This was back about 11, 12 years ago. Meghan McCain was talking about this war that seemed to be emerging inside the Republican Party. And, I think that she basically nailed it. She said, I think we're seeing a war brewing in the Republican Party, but it is not between us and the Democrats. Most of the old school Republicans are scared, and then she used that word, shall we say, crapless, of that future. That was Meghan McCain in 2009. And now you've got Liz Cheney saying that she knew that there were Republicans who wanted to vote to impeach Donald Trump during the last impeachment hearing, where she voted to impeach Donald Trump. And those Republicans wanted to vote to impeach Donald Trump, but, and I quote Liz Cheney, they were afraid for their own security and afraid for their lives. For their lives. I mean, you go back to January 6th, you had these traitors storming the U.S. Capitol, bringing a gallows to hang the Vice President of the United States, and another group of them searching the Capitol building, apparently with the help of a sitting member of Congress telling them where the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, was, so that they could, quote, put a bullet in her forehead, end quote. So I think Liz Cheney is probably right when she says that her colleagues are scared for their lives. You have to wonder about Congressman Clyde, right? The guy from Georgia who read this statement, and I would sure like to know who wrote that statement that he read. Who read this statement a couple days ago on, before Congress. It's been played ad infinitum on MSNBC. I'm assuming it's popping up on CNN and other news sources as well, where he said, if you didn't know otherwise, watching the protesters walk through the between the stanchions through the statuary hall on their way to the Capitol, you would have thought it was just another tourist day, right? Just another normal tour in the Capitol building, right? Yeah, where 140 cops end up in the hospital, where 5 people are dead. Ultimately, 7 people are dead, 3 of them police officers. Just another day. Just, average stuff. And you see this, and you have to wonder, what's going on with the Republican Party? Well, what's going on is we have this movement toward fascism, and fascism is basically driven by bullies. These people are authoritarians. Authoritarians, is the psychology word for bullies, right? Or, a fancy word for it. Jeff Duncan, he's the Republican lieutenant governor for the state of Georgia, the number 2 guy under Brian Kemp, the governor. He was on MSNBC this morning, on Morning Joe, and he said he's not going to seek re-election. And they asked him why, and he said, and I quote,
This is in today's rant, by the way, over at HartmannReport.com. If you want to get any of these original quotes or links to the articles, I've got them all in there. No ads, no cost. Anyhow, he says, look, I got 3 kids, 3 boys, 19, 15, 10. I'm married to my high school sweetheart. These have been some very interesting times for us. I'm proud to have them on my team. They've been very supportive. But, you know, he's talking about his family. But when you receive death threats from hundreds of Republicans from around the country, that's a problem when you're only sitting there telling the truth. End of quote. This is what's going on. I mean, for over 100 years, authoritarians have tried to destroy democracy. The largest and most well-known of the authoritarian anti-democracy groups in America was called the Klan, the Ku Klux Klan. Today, they go by a half a dozen or a dozen different names. But they're basically the Klan. These are the paramilitary shock troops now of the 21st century. The Klan was the 20th century and the late 19th century. Back in the 1970s and throughout the 1980s, for example, and then, you know, these people operate by intimidations and threats. Back in the late 70s, the early 80s, the most popular talk show host in America was a guy named Alan Berg. They made a movie about him called Talk Radio. It's been 10, 15 years. And on June 8th, and he was a progressive. He was the #1 talk show host in America. He was doing his show out of a station in Denver that blew a signal into 29 states. And on June 18th, 1984, a couple of skinheads walked up to him in the parking lot of his radio station and shot him to death. That was June 18th of 84. October 14th of 84, June, July, August, September, October, 5 months later, a guy named Rush Limbaugh debuts with a right-wing talk show that soon replaces Alan Berg regionally and then, you know, by 87 nationally, and now, you know, has become, until his recent death, the nation's most outspoken bully. I mean, bullying is what these people are all about. You've got the forced pregnancy bullies who stand outside, you know, family planning clinics and yell and scream at women that they think might be getting abortions or even birth control. As we speak, the Republican Party is trying to enlist 10,000 so-called poll watchers, thugs who will intimidate suspicious people who want to vote. And you and I both know what suspicious people means to Republicans. If you've ever tried to engage a right-winger on in any kind of social media, you know what how quickly it devolves into bullying and name-calling. You've got these right-wing paramilitary groups who are wearing Army-style camouflage and carrying around giant weapons, partly to make up for their own insecurities, but also to enhance their ability to bully people. I mean, they've tried mass murder as a bullying technique. Tim McVeigh in Oklahoma City. When this white supremacist kid drives up to Wisconsin, his mother drives him up to Wisconsin, and he murders 2 Black Lives Matter protesters. Republican bullies across the country raised literally millions of dollars for him. School boards are facing these bullies, which we talked about in the previous hour, all across the country. When Barack Obama decided to adopt Mitt Romney's plan for Massachusetts health care, Romney Care, and call it the Affordable Care Act, you had these right-wing bullies showing up at town hall meetings that members of Congress are just trying to give people information. Oh, no, we're going to shout you down. Anthony Fauci now has to have a private security detail for his children because of death threats. Right-wing bullies in Michigan put together a plan to kidnap the Democratic governor, Gretchen Whitmer, and haul her off for a phony trial and execution on television. Donald Trump said that he would pay the legal fees of any bullies in his audience who injured people who were protesting against him. His wife wore a shirt to go down to look at the children he put in cages that said, "I really don't care, do you?" Bullies? Mitch McConnell bullied Barack Obama, refused for a whole year to even consider Merrick Garland. Defeating bullies is more art than science. And yes, there's the kick them in the nuts school. The way that you defeat a bully is by beating them, crushing them.
And I'll describe exactly what Democrats can do to do that on the other side of this break. It's 15 minutes past the hour. Stick around. We'll be back. And then we'll be getting to your phone calls as well.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I think the best strategies are for Democrats to defeat these Republican bullies. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. You had a previous caller who called up pretty often. Used to work in intelligence and
Dave,
government. Yeah. I think he's spot on about a lot of things. I will just get to the point right away, and then we can go back from there if you would like to.
Please. It's always best when you call into a radio show to make your point and then support it, rather than trying to support a point and then eventually make it because you run out of time. So go for it, Bob.
Yeah, I'm trying to pay attention to that. I don't think Biden's going to do anything to really bring much of a stop to this fascism, because if he did, he would be playing into the fascist point of view that, look at this authoritarian government putting its foot down with us, not on them, and it would just go on. And he's in a real pickle jar. And I tried to make this point with some people that I know well. We're fairly connected, and I said, we really need the radical approach that Bernie offers at this point in time for climate change, and the rest will follow.
And none of this is radical, by the way, Bob. It's just being positioned that way.
I know that. Let me finish my point,
sure,
please.
Go for it.
Okay. If we take care of the climate change issues and the natural resource management issues and the healthcare problem, the rest will follow.
I agree.
Period. That's it. That's all I want to say today. Period.
Sure. I would toss student debt in there, but yeah, I totally get it, and I completely agree. Bob, thank you. And thanks for getting to the point. Chaz in Lakewood, Washington. Hey, Chaz, what's up?
Hi then, Tom.
Is that a new language?
No, it should be a parental one to you. It's Norwegian.
Oh, hi then? Heigen?
Hi then, yeah. It almost sounds like hi friend, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Hey, listen, it kind of worries me a little bit every time you invoke Alan Berg, and I sent you a note about that. Maybe you'll see eventually. I wanted to maybe wax sort of about white supremacy, if that's okay.
Sure.
All right, so listen.
You have about 45 seconds.
That's exactly what I need. You're a white supremacist, so whites are universally superior. So your demographic has inevitably reigned over the world without firing a single shot. So the NBA MVP is white. You and your descendants are renowned for having the longest lives. Your country is regularly identified as having the highest happiness quotient. Do you refuse to eat sushi, pizza, tacos? Do you speak English or American? Can you be the best and not have to shoot up black churches? Be the best and not be afraid of immigrant children? Be the best and not be threatened by minor variation in your species? The opposite of inbreeding is outbreeding or hybrid vigor. You'll want to look that up. It has made America a premier force in its strength. And how can you be the superior race and involuntarily celibate? Finally, if you are so American, why doesn't it show up in your DNA test?
Great. That's... Chaz, if you haven't written that down and put it someplace, you should.
I'll put it on op-ed.
Opednews.com? Okay, great.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's a good one. Chaz, thank you for that. Great to hear from you. We'll be back. Stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Hey, Hey, we have a new video out about the 1776 Commission. Remember this commission that Donald Trump put together to explain the history of America, to have true principles, because history is being distorted by things like the New York Times 1619 report, you know. No, seriously, this is what Donald Trump said, that, you know, we're engaging now in revisionist history by highlighting the history of slavery in the United States. And so he put together this bizarre commission, and now in the state of South Carolina, Senator Dwight Loftus and others have introduced legislation requiring that Trump's commission, which had no historians on it, 18 people, not a single historian, that commission's findings be taught as history in the public schools in South Carolina. It's absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, it's like they want to take us back to the 1930s. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. So the Republican Party has sold themselves all the way back to the 60s, really, as the serious party. We're the party of issues. We take stuff seriously. We have serious policy analysis. We have serious constitutional analysis. We are serious about the economy. We have all these think tanks, Heritage and Competitive Enterprise and Cato, and we've got
we're back?
You know,
and we're back. Okay. I'm hearing funny stuff in my ear. All righty. So welcome back. Back to just to finish up this rant. You know, the things that the Democrats can do. Number one, Democrats can end the filibuster, and then pass legislation that actually puts America back together. And if Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema are standing in the way of ending the filibuster, Chuck Schumer needs to either step up and do some bullying of his own, or probably more ideally use some carrots. There are things they want. There are things that Joe Manchin wants. There are things that Kyrsten Sinema wants that Chuck Schumer can give them. I mean, this is, you know, Lyndon Johnson was the master of this. And if Schumer can't whip his caucus, if he can't get those senators, all of them, completely in line with either ending the filibuster or, frankly, I think what might even be better. I've written several op-eds on this. You can find them at hartmannreport.com, where you simply say, yeah, as long as you've got 40 members on the floor and somebody is talking, we will suspend activity of the Senate. But the minute you stop talking, or the minute you drop below 40 people on the floor, the filibuster is over and we're going to hold a vote. I call it the Jimmy Stewart filibuster. So come on, Chuck, you can pull this off. You can do this. So that's step one, number one. Number two, the Supreme Court. We had a caller about this yesterday. I wrote an entire book about this, the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Back in the 1980s, when John Roberts worked for Ronald Reagan, John Roberts wrote this long memo. Let me back it up a little bit. Reagan hired Roberts with one specific job. The Republican Party had come to power, and there was outrage among the Republican base about two Supreme Court decisions. The 1954 Brown versus Board decision that integrated public schools, and the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision that struck down state laws against abortion all across the United States and gave women the legal right to have an abortion. The Republican base was furious about these things. Reagan wanted them overturned, but they were Supreme Court decisions. So he hires this lawyer, this young guy named John Roberts, and gives him an office in the Justice Department and says, okay, you have a year, figure out how can we overturn these decisions. And Roberts goes back and looks at the Constitution and reads the Federalist Papers and reads all of John Adams, James Madison's writings from the Constitutional Convention, the diaries of the Constitutional Convention, and Jefferson's rants about the Supreme Court, all of which is in my book on the Supreme Court. And he comes back and he says, you know, he writes this long memo, and I reprint actually parts of that memo in the book. He comes back and he says, you know,
The Constitution says in Article 3, Section 2, that Congress can pass a law saying that the Supreme Court can't rule on something. So why don't you just pass a law saying abortion, states can make abortion illegal if they want, and states can practice segregation if they want, and append to the end of that law a sentence that says this may not be reviewed, this is not subject to judicial review, this may not be reviewed by the Supreme Court. That was John Roberts' recommendation to Reagan. The problem that Reagan had was through the entire 8 years of his presidency, the Democrats controlled the House of Representatives, so he could never get that legislation through. Well, right now, Democrats control both the House and the Senate. Let's pass some good old-fashioned court-stripping legislation. If you're not going to change the court, if you're not going to expand the court, which is another power, by the way, that Congress has, Congress can regulate the Supreme Court, and they can define exceptions to the power of the Supreme Court. Now, Biden has put together this commission, but to look at the Supreme Court and the entire federal judiciary. Problem is, he's got a bunch of Republicans on his commission who are Federalist Society members. Nothing good is going to come out of it, just like nothing good will come out of a January 6th commission. Why? Because it's, quote, bipartisan. So instead, how about passing some legislation that says, just straight up and straightforward, the Supreme Court, we are passing the For the People Act. We are giving every citizen of the United States the right to vote and to vote easily. And the Supreme Court may not review this law. It is not subject to judicial review. That's my suggestion. Okay, there's a couple of things. There's a couple of really big sticks that Democrats have. And then, of course, the one that we talked about in the previous hour of using a special prosecutor instead of a commission to look into what happened on January 6th. Because there were crimes that set up the crimes. Back with your calls after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
What do you think are the best ways the Democrats can push back against Republican bullies? Stick around. Back with your calls.
For the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, it's Waking the Witch, Reflections on Women, Magic, and Power by Pam Grossman. This is from the introduction. Witches have always walked among us, populating societies and storyscapes across the globe for thousands of years. From Circe to Hermione, from Morgan Le Fay to Marie Laveau, the witch has long existed in the tales we tell about ladies with strange powers who can harm or heal. And although people of all genders have been considered witches, it's a word that is now usually associated with women. Throughout most of history, she has someone to fear, an uncanny other who threatens our safety or manipulates reality for her own mercurial purposes. She's a pariah, a persona non grata, a boogie woman to defeat and discard. Although she's often been deemed a destructive entity, in actuality, a witchy woman has historically been far more susceptible to attack than an inflictor of violence herself. As with other terrifying outsiders, she occupies a paradoxical role in cultural consciousness as both vicious aggressor and vulnerable prey. Over the past 150 years or so, however, the witch has done another magic trick by turning from a fright into a figure of inspiration. She is now as likely to be the heroine of your favorite TV show as she is its villain. She might show up in the form of your Wiccan co-worker or the beloved musician who gives off a sorceress vibe in videos or on stage. There's also a chance that she is you, and that witch is an identity you've taken upon yourself for any number of reasons, heartfelt or flippant, public or private. Today, more women than ever are choosing the way of the witch, whether literally or symbolically. They're floating down catwalks and sidewalks in gauzy black clothing and adorning themselves with Pinterest-worthy pentagrams and crystals. They're filling up movie theaters to watch witchy films and gathering in back rooms and backyards to do rituals, consult tarot cards, and set life-altering intentions. They're marching in the streets with Hex the Patriarchy placards and casting spells each month to try to constrain the commander-in-chief. Year after year, articles keep proclaiming it's the season of the witch, as journalists try to wrap their heads around the mushrooming witch trend. And all of this begs the question, why? Why do witches matter? Why are they seemingly everywhere right now? What exactly are they? And why the hell won't they go away? I get asked such things over and over, and you would think that after a lifetime of studying and writing about witches, as well as hosting a witch-themed podcast and being a practitioner of witchcraft myself, my answers would be succinct. In fact, I find that the more I work with the witch, the more complex she becomes. Hers is a slippery spirit. Try to pin her down and she'll only recede further into the dark, deep wood. I do know this for sure, though. Show me your witches, and I'll show you your feelings about women. The fact that the resurgence of feminism and the popularity of the witch are ascending at the same time is no coincidence. The two are reflections of each other. That said, this current witch wave is nothing new. I was a teen in the 1990s, the decade that brought us such pop culture as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, and The Craft. Not to mention riot girls and third-wave feminists who taught me that female power could come in a variety of colors and sexualities. I learned that women could lead a revolution while wearing lipstick and combat boots, and sometimes even a cloak. But my own witchly awakening came at an even earlier age. Morganville, New Jersey, where I was raised, was a solidly suburban town, but it retained enough natural land features back then to still feel a little bit scruffy in spots. We had a small patch of woods in our backyard that abutted a horse farm, and the two were separated by a wisp of running water that we could cross via a plank of wood. When we were little, my older sister Emily and I would sometimes venture to the other side where we could feed the horses, an act that still scares me to this day, and pick fistfuls of clover. But the majority of our time was spent on our side of the stream, threading ourselves through the thicket of trees that served as our personal forest. In one corner of the yard, a giant puddle would form whenever it rained, surrounded by a border of ferns. We called this spot our magical place. That it would vanish and then reappear only added to its mystery. It was a portal to the unknown. These woods are where I first remember doing magic, entering that state of deep play where imaginative action becomes reality. I would spend hours out there creating rituals with rocks and sticks, drawing secret symbols in the dirt, losing all track of time. It was a space that felt holy and wild, yet still strangely safe. As we age, we're supposed to stop filling our heads with such nonsense. Unicorns are to be traded in for Barbie dolls, though both are mythical creatures to be sure. We lose our tooth fairies, walk away from our wizards. Dragons get slain on the altar of our youth. Most kids grow out of their magic phase. I grew further into mine. My grandma Trudy was a librarian at the West Long Branch Library, which meant I got to spend many a long afternoon lurking between the 001.9 and 135 Dewey Decimal sections, reading about Bigfoot and dream interpretation in Nostradamus. Waking the Witch by Ken Grossman.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Hey, we have a couple of special things over at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com. Of course, at HartmannReport.com, every single day, well, 6 days a week, Sunday excepted, I write a rant about an issue of the day that I think is important. Louise and I work on these together. We get them out typically around 6 in the morning Pacific time. And you'll find that at HartmannReport.com. It's free. You can sign up for it. There's no ads, whatever. But also over at ThomHartmann.com, we have a video every week for the supporters of our program. And the one this week is about how Wisconsin is trying to remove, in fact, they just got permission from their Supreme Court to remove 188,000 people from the voting rolls because they haven't voted in 4 years. This highlights the importance of getting to know who is your state representative, who is your state senator, and communicating with them regularly. It's all over at HartmannReport.com
and ThomHartmann.com.
I'm not on the air, am I? I'm not seeing myself on camera. Anyhow, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. There we are. Coronavirus vaccines may not. This just popped up at the top of the Washington Post. I just wanted to flag this for you. And, you know, it gets into this question of the CDC and, you know, should the CDC be promoting this new mask rule? The headline is coronavirus vaccines may not work in some people. It's because of their underlying conditions. Early research shows 15 to 80% of people with certain medical conditions, such as specific blood cancers or organ transplants, are generating few antibodies from receiving coronavirus vaccines. So they tell the story of Maria Hoffman. She is 39. She's fully vaccinated. She wants to rejoin the world. But she had a kidney transplant. And so she's on immunosuppressed drugs. And it turns out that even though she's fully vaccinated, she didn't produce any antibodies because she's on these drugs that suppress her immune system, which means that if she gets near some mask hole, so, you know, one of these COVID deniers, one of these Trump followers who is refusing to wear a mask and is carrying an infection that they may not even know that they have, she can get COVID and she could die. And she's not alone. She's one of, you know, many millions of Americans. I'm thinking the CDC is just moving a little too fast on this. I really do. And I think that, you know, this decision to say, oh, it's all good, you know, take off your mask, go out there in the world. It's kind of predicated on the assumption, I mean, they're not saying this out loud, but you have to imagine that this is really what they're thinking, is that, well, you know, most people who are vaccinated are probably going to end up with a COVID infection because, you know, 2/3 of the country is not fully vaccinated. And so if you walk into a store, odds are you're going to inhale the virus and you're going to end up with COVID, but you'll never know it because you're vaccinated and therefore you're going to be asymptomatic, or at the very worst, you're going to feel like you had a cold for a couple of days. You know, a little sore throat, something like that. And so, I mean, this is kind of the assumptions. And so therefore, hey, what the heck? We don't need no stinking masks. Well, you know, there are a number of people for whom this will be a crisis. And I am just concerned. I think they have not, I think that, you know, they're saying, you know, Biden said, let the CDC run independent of me, of politics. Whereas Trump said the CDC has to say whatever I want them to say. And he totally corrupted the CDC and had them lying through their teeth and coming up with reports that justified pushing people back into meatpacking plants and all kinds of, I mean, just insane stuff that happened at the CDC during the Trump administration. I think Biden went too far in the other direction. I think he should have told them that anything that has to do with something that is so large, that affects so much of America as mask recommendations for the whole country during a pandemic, should at the very least be run past the White House before they're publicly announced. And that's, I mean, the CDC told the White House what was coming, but then they made the announcement and the White House was like, I don't know. My personal opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. Time will tell, right? Time will tell. Anyhow, let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Connie in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, Connie, what's on your mind?
Hello, Tom. Well, you were talking this morning about elected officials and even Dr. Fauci, or especially Dr. Fauci, fearing for their lives and just being scared to death. I'm wondering about Mike Pence. He's not at Mar-a-Lago. Do you think he will be invited to the Republican convention and be highly visible? Or I don't see how he and his wife and family can keep silent about the gallows, the noose, the chanting to kill. Has he returned to Indiana?
My understanding is that they're in hiding. You know, that they have, that there were several different houses that they were moving between throughout much of January and February. And that
you know, I kind of lost track of them. I don't know that their whereabouts is known, and I'm guessing that if their whereabouts is known, if they are someplace where we know where they are, that they have security details like nobody's business. They would have to. I mean,
Well,
he had over 1,000 people trying to kill him.
Right. And the vice president, the ex-vice president, gets the Secret Service protection?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, which brings up Carol Lennox's new book about the Secret Service.
Right, yeah, I saw that segment last night on, I don't recall if it was Chris Hayes, I think it was Chris Hayes' show or Rachel
it was
Maddow's.
Rachel, actually.
Oh, it was Rachel, yeah.
Maddow, she had Carol on there. And
that's right.
So, well, I just hope that some underground group or something will get a hold of one of Pence's staff and they'll talk because he's not an old man, and is he just going to, hide some? Maybe just
Who knows?
so frightened.
I mean, he's probably got enough money that he's set for life, and I mean, who knows? I don't know. But Connie, good question. Good question. Thank you for the call, and thanks for asking it. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Well, Tom, I just kind of want to riff a little on my relatively newly evolved philosophy that Democrats need to take the states' rights position to once and for all and comprehensively determine which political philosophy is successful and which ones are failures. And I've already shared with you, I won't go into elaborate about my taxation policy about taxing the states rather than individuals. I've sent you that article. Maybe you want to post that on your Facebook page. But and the
I think it's
thrust
wise.
of it is that, huh?
I think it is wise. I think it makes a lot of sense. I don't think it'll ever happen, but I think it's a good idea, Paul.
Well, okay, but maybe that's a start. It's an idea, but we have to, in 1932, Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, in a case called New State Ice Company versus Liebman, it was in Oklahoma, in a dissent wrote that the states should be the laboratories of democracy.
Right.
Now, in a laboratory, if you have a vessel, a flask or a test tube, you have to not let it be contaminated by other vessels. So we need to find out once and for all which states, for instance, are going to allow you to vote, or are they going to obstruct your right to vote? Which states are going to allow women to have the right to their own choice of reproductive choices? Which states are going to say, no, go ahead, let it be the Wild West, and everybody has a gun and shoots each other? We need to start stop bailing the right-wing states out. Stop bailing out the red states by trying to save them all.
Yeah.
Now, if the Supreme Court wants to overturn Roe versus Wade or wants to let Mississippi do what they want, you know what they're going to do? They're going to cause a war in 25 red states, a war with women who live there. But you know what's going to happen in Washington State and in Oregon and in California? Nothing.
Yep.
Okay, so let them have at it, because we got to start once and for all, put the Republicans, whatever party you want to call it, we got to put them to the test and say, is your political philosophy successful or not? And stop letting them contaminate and corrupt the whole system just to obstruct and say, because you know what we do? We bail them out, and poor people in red states are on entitlements. And then what do? Do we get any credit for it? No, the Republicans there take credit for it and then call us socialists.
Right.
While their constituents are the highest consumers of entitlements. So it's crap. We got to start saying, no, okay, you're on your own. You want states' rights? Go ahead. A couple of years, but I think it was in 2012, Alexa Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi's daughter, interviewed people in Mississippi. I remember this one person you talked to. She said, Mississippi is economically left. So your Republican ideals and policies really haven't worked for you, have they? And the man said, well, no, they haven't. But they could work. But we'd rather die than give up our beliefs. I thought, go ahead at it, buddy.
Yeah.
Drop dead.
Yeah.
You know what? You don't want to give up your beliefs?
You know,
I don't
the
care,
analysis that you're suggesting, Paul, of let's start comparing red states to blue states, and let's look at their outcomes. Let's look at their health care outcomes. Let's look at their infant mortality outcomes. Let's look at their maternal mortality outcomes. Let's look at their pay outcomes. Let's look at their quality of life outcomes. Let's look at their level of democracy outcomes. Let's look at their economic outcomes. Let's look at their state welfare outcomes. Like Kentucky gets $3 and change for every dollar that they send to D.C. Let's start analyzing those things, and let's start keeping a scoreboard. I think that's brilliant. And I think that should become a project of the Democratic Party.
So send me that link or send me that article again, and I'll see what I can do with it. But I think it's an absolutely brilliant idea. Paul, thank you very much for the call. It's 45 minutes past the hour. Back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, helping you win the water cooler wars.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Now that we are literally back to places with water coolers, we have one here. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Kathy in Kalispell, Montana. Hey, Kathy, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Here's my point. I believe that how we label and name problems in our society is very important, and it is my opinion that we need to use stronger language than bullies or bullying. To me, it carries a bit of a schoolyard connotation. And so here are my alternatives. These people are abusers, they are criminals, they are lawbreakers, and they are cowards.
And they are fascists.
And they are fascists.
Yeah.
And I don't know how public figures handle it. If this is what comes with elected office, especially for the Democrats, and this level of threat appears, I would be scared to death if it was me.
Yeah.
I would be horrified. I would be in the basement, curled up in a ball.
Yeah.
I don't know how they handle it.
It comes with the territory. I mean, it's death threats, whether you're a lefty on the radio or whether you're a lefty elected to Congress. It just comes with the territory, and most of the time it's just attempts to scare people, attempts to bully people. And
the Republicans are scared now, apparently.
Now, finally, yeah, they have turned their guns on their own party, and this is what Meghan McCain was talking about in 2009, when she said that she's seen a war break out in the Republican Party, and it's not against Democrats for the first time, in her lifetime. And I think in 2009, her dad was still alive, or around, as I recall. And she said, it's got Republicans scared crapless, only she used the word you can't say on the air. And I get it. I totally get it. And the reason I used the word bullies in my op-ed that I wrote this morning, and in my rant today, is because it's a word that is universally understood, and that doesn't have a political connotation typically. If I had used the word fascist or criminal, it's easy for people on the right or people who might be moderate, low information voters, shall we say, the moderate Republican, whatever, to say, oh, he's just being partisan. But when I go through the 10 or 15 examples in that article and use the word bully in each one of those cases, I think most people would find it hard to push back on my use of the word bully, and thus I can make my point. And that's why I was using fairly soft language. But Kathy, expanding on it, ranting about it on the radio, talking about it in politics, I think you're absolutely right. And now they're killing people. From Tim McVeigh to this moment, to the number one terrorist threat in the United States is white guys with guns. It's literally the number one terrorist threat in the United States, and has been for probably a couple decades, certainly, since 2009. And when the FBI issued that report, and Barack Obama pulled the report because he was getting all this kind of blowback. So, Kathy, I'm with you. Thank you. You made a brilliant point, and I appreciate the call. And thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. I got to read an ad over on the commercial side, and for Mack Weldon, and I'll be back with you in just 1 minute. Stick around.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Well, the Confederacy continues to live. Governor Tate Reeves, the governor of Mississippi, just signed a proclamation making April the Confederate Heritage Month in Mississippi. That's kind of the bad news. The good news is that it didn't get published on the state's websites. It got published over on Facebook, where there's a good contingent of racists and neo-Confederates to begin with. But what does this say about America? That a part of the country that literally was a police state, a fascist police state, there was no democracy left by 1861 in the South. It was completely controlled by a few thousand families who owned these massive plantations. And in my little riff that's over at ThomHartmann.com for the supporters of our program, I go through some of the details of it. Just the sad, sad history of the South. It is really worth checking out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Jessica in Chicago. Hey, Jessica, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. Your caller that wanted to know about Pence, he hid out in St. Croix for over a month, and the Heritage Foundation pays him. But you are 100% right. Republicans are bullies, and they think they can get away with anything. Marjorie Taylor Greene cheated on her taxes and's been caught. She wrote off both her homes as residents when she filed her taxes.
Took a homestead exemption for both of them, yeah.
Yes, and Matt Gaetz having sex with an underage girl and calling it naughty favors. That's the most disgusting thing.
Yeah.
And then one last thing, and I still think it has to do with Republicans. There needs to be an independent investigation in that Brown shooting, because the DA is friends with the cops who shot Brown.
Which is almost always the case. Yeah, exactly. And that's why these kind of things work out the way they do. And I'm totally with you. And this is the kind of thing where, at the very least, the FBI or the Department of Justice should be opening an investigation into whether his civil right to life was violated. I mean, there are remedies for this that go beyond what happened locally. I'm with you. And Jessica.
The DA needs to recuse himself.
Yeah, I'm with you. Thank you, Jessica. John in Chicago. Hey, John, what's up?
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to point out that a special prosecutor in January 6th isn't a panacea either, because of the Mueller report. The Mueller report never investigated Trump's ties to Russia financially or otherwise. It just simply pointed out obstruction of justice and gave a very heavily redacted. Yeah.
The reason that they didn't, they actually had, under the statute, they had the ability to investigate that. But Bill Barr, in his instructions to Mueller, he was the Attorney General, in his instructions to Mueller, basically said, don't look at the Trump piece of this thing, the prior to the election. That is off limits. He time limited it, but the legislation didn't. And so, but I get what you're saying, and that's why I think a special prosecutor with absolute, they can do what they want. Not a special prosecutor who's tightly constrained. Your point is well made, John. It's very well made. Thank you very much for calling and making it. Alice in Peekskill, New York. Hey, Alice, what's up?
Hi, I thank you so much for discussing civics education. That is such an important topic. But I wanted to talk about, as a Black American, and I'm not an African American, I have Irish, German, Cherokee, Lumbee, and African roots. I am an actual American who happens to be Black. People like Obama are African Americans, and that's one thing. But as a Black American, you've frequently discussed the Republican agenda and how, again, they managed to destroy civics education, how, they ultimately get their agenda done. And having seen what they've done on January 6th, and flying, walking around with the Confederate flag. They're not going to stop.
No.
What do you think is their end point? I mean, and what is supposed to happen to me? When Trump first took office, and I'm in northern Westchester, white men gave me a look like I should have gone up in a puff of smoke. People here have Trump flags, Blue Lives Matter flags. I'm 5 minutes from where the Robeson riots were.
Wow.
And those people are still around, and some even still have a Confederate flag that they fly.
Well, to specifically answer your question, Alice, assuming it was not rhetorical, what they're after
I'm curious because I really want to know what you think is
what they're after is a return
happen.
of the Confederacy. And that's why they use Confederate iconography. The Confederacy, around 1820, basically, stopped being even resembling a democracy. With the rise of the oligarchs, and this was largely the result of the invention of the cotton gin, which was a very expensive contraption that only the big plantations could afford. And it made them literally 50 times more efficient than the small farmers. So over about a 30, 40-year period there, between 1820 and 1850, the entire South came to be dominated by about 1,500 families who owned the economy and owned the politics. It was a white ethno-state, fascist ethno-state, with anybody who was not white had absolutely no power, and even poor whites had very little power. And that's what they're trying to return America to. They see that as their ideal. End democracy. Go ahead.
Are we a little bit like that? I mean, when you see how the corporate farms have taken over, and you go to certain places, and all you see is Monsanto signs, for instance.
Yeah, no, we are a little bit like that, and frankly, I would think that the way that we police, particularly the way that police interact with black people in this country, is an indication of that, the South still lives. A lot of our policing came out of the old slave patrols. But,
what will happen to me?
Well, this is why we're all fighting to have, a pluralistic, egalitarian country, so that you as a black person, me as a liberal, we can live in this country also. Alice, thank you for the call. I got to run.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Club's creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code Tom. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
We're reading today from Warrior Is by Harley and Robin Zephyr. It's the story of their great-grandfather who, in real life, killed Custer at Little Bighorn. And in fact, there's a map of the war, as it were, the battle. And they say that he is now the spirit keeper of Custer, which is remarkable. And there's a page-and-a-half introduction to the book, and then it becomes, a historically accurate novel, basically. This story is the traditional and cultural account of the life of Nikogju Lakota warrior Mato Nyanpi, saved by Bear, which his name in English, also later known as Scarleg. Warrior is based upon a true story. What you are about to read has been told to us through our family, passed down as oral history from generation to generation. Every family has its own story. This is ours. It's up to you to visualize and experience the events described herein in order to determine what you believe or what you choose to accept from what you learn from these pages. You've likely never read a story quite like this before. In Warrior Is, the reader is able to visualize and experience the events and circumstances of Mato Nyanpi's life. Many times the story is told in the present tense, such as if you were walking with Saved by Bear and his people as the events unfold. This was our original manner of storytelling. Other times the story is narrated in the past tense to account for a past perspective. Those of us who may not be entirely fluent in particular words or specific language as much as we may be fluent in spirit and honest communication, the life messages many times can be more meaningful than just the written or spoken words. Warrior Is follows the timeline from the time of creation, moving through Saved by Bear's birth in 1849 and going up to July 1876, 2 weeks after the Grass Battle. Please exercise your free will and follow your conscience when reading this story. The spiritual side is called upon you to open your spirit so that you may read this tale and learn about these events through your own spirit. And, continues sort of like in that line, but here, right to the book. Prologue. He smelled the yellow of the sun. His spirit was alive and energetic. He felt the energy in his chest and all along the blood running through his veins. He looked to his left to see his great friend by his side. The strong scent of sage caressed his nostrils and reminded him of home. The movement over the high-running hilly ridge to the south caught his eye. He and Swift Bear sensed and felt the pathway opening up. So much had occurred so quickly, so suddenly, so dramatically. Their call to duty, his call to duty, filled his mind, his heart, his spirit. Today, it was meant to happen. It was presented to the people from the Creator. The plan was made. The warriors summoned. The preparation was done. It all led to this place, this portal in time. The sparse clouds to the west resembled mare's tails, and for a brief moment he remembered his white stone friend in the White Mountains. He remembered his spiritual commitment to protect his people, Grandmother Earth, and the sacred Hisapa. And time stood still for a moment, a small moment in time, through all of the ancient and original history of all the moments of time. And as the group of the horse-mounted soldiers rode briskly over the far ridge, the Creator shined that warm, nurturing light upon these warriors, such as Creator had been doing since the beginning of time, since the beginning of Grandmother Earth and Grandfather Sky, and at the beginning of all things. All the moments of time forever had arrived here, now. It had come to this. Creator's strong will and great invisible hand had placed them here. It was the Creator all along. It always was. It always would be. For one to know what led the young Lakota warriors to be here at this fateful site near the Greasy Grass River on this warm, sun-drenched day, one must go back in time, way back to the beginning, when it was only the Creator, and the Creator of all things decided to create a new world. Her name would be Unsimaka, Grandmother Earth, and she would be created to hold and sustain life. All kinds of beings, all kinds of people would be given and placed upon and within her to show her love of life. And this is how it all began. Chapter 1, Origin. The human beings evolved from the spirit. Before arriving in Wind Cave, we were star people. Many of us came from a place called the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, an ancient star grouping and constellation that contains worlds comprised of the gift of life-giving water. Water is life. Mini Wikoni. The Pleiadian influence is an absolute, but those of us who claim to be relatives of the Pleiadians share a common bond with other indigenous people, regardless of where we are geographically on the earth. we will always remain Pleiadian star people. Spiritually, we have become human beings of different races and ethnicities, but the origin of our spirit is the water. And for us, and as to who we are, as the tribal people in a family way, our name is Minkoju, its evidence. It means life's subsistence through the gathering and planting by the waters and or river. The Minikoju spend their lives living by the waters. This is something that many of our own people do not know or understand, but this is our history, not only of our physical existence, but also the history of our spiritual existence on Unsimaka. The book is Warrior Is by Robin and Harley Zephyr.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We've talked about a lot of points here so far in the first 2 hours of the program. I want to add a couple more to our conversation, and then I'll be picking up your phone calls, and we can just kind of dig through this. We've talked about the bullying in the Republican Party. We've talked about the rise of fascism in the Republican Party. We've talked about all these, the different pieces of how there's basically been a takeover of rationality and common sense within the party of Dwight Eisenhower. In fact, I think you could argue, to interrupt myself here, I think you could argue that Dwight Eisenhower actually saved the Republican Party from itself. Right? In the 1920s, the Republican Party had gone full libertarian with the election of Warren Harding in 1920. And he was elected on a platform of undoing government regulation, privatizing government functions. The slogan that he used in his election campaign was more business in government, less government in business. In other words, privatize, deregulate. And his other slogan, the main one that he ran on, was called a return to normalcy. And what Warren Harding meant by that in 1920 was dropping the top 91% tax rate that Woodrow Wilson had put into place during World War I, dropping that 91% tax rate back down to 25%, which he did. So he lowered taxes, he massively deregulated the government, he started privatizing government functions, and it led straight to the Republican Great Depression, which is what it was called until the 1950s, the early 1950s. They basically stopped calling it the Republican Great Depression around the time Dwight Eisenhower was elected in 1952. And then they just started calling it the Great Depression. I prefer calling it the Republican Great Depression to distinguish it from others. I mean, we've had several, right, in the history of this country. But in any case, what we find is that Eisenhower saved the party from itself by saying, we're not going to go down that crazy road. And then Goldwater came along in '64 and said, no, the crazy road, craziness in defense of liberty is no vice, right? I mean, he used the word extremism, but you get my point. And the Republican Party's back at it. They're back to trying to be essentially the old Confederacy, repudiating democracy and hating on people and using hate as a wedge issue and using race as a wedge issue and all this kind of stuff. And now we've got, this is just incredible. The guy who's the lawyer for Jacob Chainsley. Jacob Chainsley is the Q shaman, the guy who stood at Nancy Pelosi's speaker's podium in the House of Representatives with his, giant Viking horns, in his face all painted and the fur over his shoulders. This guy's lawyer. His name is Watkins. He comes out and he says his client has a disturbed mental state, and the problem is Trump's propaganda. He says, quote, a lot of these defendants, and I'm going to use this colloquial term perhaps disrespectfully, but they're all effing short bus people. These are people with brain damage. They're effing retarded. They're on the damn spectrum. But, he continues, keep in mind, this is the lawyer for one of the guys who invaded the Capitol. But they're our brothers, our sisters, our neighbors, our co-workers. They're part of our country. These aren't bad people. They don't have prior criminal history. They were subjected to 4+ years of damn propaganda, the likes of which the world has not seen since effing Hitler. You've got another one who is claiming Foxitis. He watched Fox News. That's why he invaded the Capitol. Over on PLOS One, there's new research that was it is a scientific journal that was just published there. It's summarized over at scipost.org about a study of Trump supporters. In fact, the headline, the article is by Beth Elwood in psypost.org. Study pinpoints 2 aspects of pathological narcissism that predicted the intention to vote for Trump in 2020. There were actually 2 personality characteristics that they tested people for, and they were able to predict who would vote for Trump or had voted for Trump and who would or hadn't, based on their scores on these 2 pieces of what is called narcissism. You'll recall, I think it was Greek mythology, Narcissus, the guy who was so in love with his own reflection in the pond that he, ended up falling in and drowning or something like that. But narcissism isn't just self-love. It actually involves exaggerated self-importance and a disregard for the lives of other people. These are called antagonistic, the antagonistic facet of narcissism, and the indifferent facet of narcissism in psychology speak. And if they looked at these 2 characteristics, the antagonistic, in other words, they think that I am more important than anybody else in the world, and this disregard for other people, the inability to empathize with other people, in fact, kind of almost on the sociopathy spectrum. The author of the study, Dr. Matthew Yalch, Y-A-L-C-H, suggests that people with inflated self-images combined with a susceptibility to feeling undervalued were attracted to Trump's grandiose personality. In other words, Beth Elwood writes, in other words, people with narcissistic tendencies themselves might be drawn to Trump's narcissistic persona, looking to defend their worth by identifying with his entitled and aggressive ways. Now, let me boil this down. What they're essentially saying is that, like in every other country, we have a mental health problem in the United States. But our mental health problem is different than that in many other countries, in that we don't treat people with mental illness. We celebrate them or ignore them. Yesterday, Louise was walking home and alone, and a homeless guy who was clearly a paranoid schizophrenic threw a water bottle at her and started screaming and chasing her. I mean, Ronald Reagan dumped 40,000 mentally ill people out of institutions when he became president. And we have had this homeless problem ever since that has been, obviously, there's an economic homeless problem, but there's also a mental illness homeless problem. So, number 1, we ignore them. Or number 2, the mentally ill people who are still functioning, they can still hold down a job, but they're nuts. They're narcissists. They have no regard for other people, and they think they're the center of the universe. We have an entire political party that caters to them, that is led by a guy who is one of them. Other countries treat mental illness, other developed countries. They offer help to people like the guy who was chasing Louise down the street. Or they offer help to the people, you know, like these people who stormed the Capitol building because they were Trump voters, Trump followers. But here in America, no. It's become, mental illness has become the touchstone for the Republican Party. Another aspect of what I was calling bullying earlier. These are narcissists. Amazing.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Which raises an interesting question. How do you deal with people who are actually mentally ill? If you're going to try to have any kind of, you know, political dialogue or anything. And welcome back. Let's see here. Tad in Chepachet, Rhode Island. Hey, Tad, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Well, thanks for taking my call, Tom. Anyway, I wanted to briefly mention Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema. And having a conversation with some folks, and I mentioned to them that these two here are really not team players the way I see it, but they are what I call Joe Lieberman Democrats. And I think that Mr. Schumer should have a sit down with them and explain the facts of life. You know, they should become team players. I understand what you're saying, Tad. I'd like to slightly disagree with you, if I may, in a very respectful way. Okay. Joe Lieberman was from Connecticut. Connecticut is the epicenter for the insurance industry in the United States. Joe Lieberman owed his career to the insurance industry. They had given him, as I recall, $1.3 million. I referenced it in a recent op-ed I wrote, so I actually looked it up. And so basically they owned him. So when it came time to negotiate Obamacare, and President Obama was talking about, hey, let's let people buy into Medicare, which was a mortal threat to the insurance industry. That was the bridge too far for Joe Lieberman, and that was when he left the Democratic Party. So basically, Joe Lieberman was bought out. Joe Manchin may have some associations with the fossil fuel industry, with the coal industry in West Virginia. But I think that a better description of Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema is that they are John McCain Democrats. John McCain didn't always go along with his own party because he was a peacock. He was, you know, look at me. I'm so cool. I'm the maverick. I'm the one who's not a conformist. I don't go along with the crowd. I'm the one who stands out. And as a result of his being that peacock, he got all the media attention. And that's what Manchin is getting and what Sinema wants. And so I think that they're really, and although I realize that saying that they're John McCain Democrats sounds like a compliment because most people have kind of a positive memory of John McCain, in part because, you know, he voted not to blow up Obamacare. But, you know, you look back on who he was and what he did, and the guy was a peacock. What do you think? Yeah. Okay, I can go for that. Yeah. One brief thing. I haven't had television in the past 3.5 years. I just got it back, and I'm viewing you on Free Speech TV because I ran into some financial difficulties. But now that I've got it back, you know, I'm out of the woods financially, and it's really a pleasure to enjoy your program once again. And I thank you for your service to the nation, Tom.
Well, thank you, Tad. I appreciate your call. And by the way, if they're peacocks and not bought out, that means that they're probably easier to deal with because all Joe Biden has to do is figure out a way to make Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin into heroes, right, rather than goats. If he can get them to become advocates for the American Jobs Plan and for the American Family Plan by giving them something that they want and push them out in the front, which is how Republicans dealt with John McCain an awful lot of the time, then maybe there's a clue here to what we can do. Tad, thanks a lot for the call. Thank you for your kind words. Thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. Whereas if they're just bought out, it's a whole hell of a lot harder to deal with somebody who's just, you know, a sold-out politician like Joe Lieberman was.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Ask a boomer what it was like going to college back in the 60s and 70s and whether they had to go into debt to do it. And odds are they'll tell you that they not only didn't have to go into debt, in fact, college was free in California until Ronald Reagan became governor. Not only did they not have to go into debt, but you could pretty much work your way through college just with a part-time job. That is very much no longer the case. Only 8% of millennials and Gen Xers have never had a student loan. This is a crushing burden on these two generations, and it's time to clean it up. And when Americans were asked, what do you think? Should we just wipe the slate clean? Should we get rid of all this student debt? 60% of Americans said yes. And then, of course, the corollary to that would be, and then let's make college free, at least state colleges and community colleges. There's a whole video about this over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. You can check it out there. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. By the way, just a couple of quick notes, and then I'm going to pick up your phone calls here. Val Demings, who was one of the impeachment managers in the second impeachment of Donald Trump, just a remarkable legislator. Used to be the police chief. She was the first black police chief for Orlando. This was back in the day. And then she ran for the U.S. House and was elected. That was in 2016 from Orlando. She was seriously considered as a possible running mate with Joe Biden. This is a woman of substance, a politician of substance. And she is just announced that she is planning to run for the United States Senate against Marco Rubio. So I just wanted to flag that for you. I noticed this morning that her official tweet, or her tweet, House of Representatives tweet, tweeted that here's our campaign tweet. So, if you want to follow the campaign, go over here, Hatch Act and all that kind of stuff. And just, separating functions. But, boy, would I love to see someone take down Marco Rubio, who today was tweeting out another Bible verse. Really, Marco? I mean, it's like, people have just kind of given up on it. Oh, and, this is just nuts. Trump voter in Colorado faces stunning voter fraud allegations. This guy, his name is where did his name go? Barry Morphew. His wife was last seen in May of last year. And while her body hasn't been found, the police have determined that she is no longer alive and her husband, Barry, murdered her. He has been charged with first-degree murder. And he voted her ballot in November for Donald Trump. We have found the voter fraud case that the Republicans have been looking for. We found this guy. This is in Texas, right? Texas has their first case of voter fraud. Well, there is that black woman who's in prison for 5 years because she tried to vote, actually. Her vote never got counted. It was a provisional ballot. She tried to vote, thinking that she could do so because she was out of jail and not realizing that when you're still on probation, you can't vote in Texas. They threw the book at her. This guy's a white guy, although they're already throwing the book at him for killing his wife, so, who knows. But there you go. Amazing stuff. Amazing stuff. So let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Moselle in Tacoma. Hey, Moselle, what's up?
Hello, how are you?
Great.
I'm calling because my grudge is my disappointment in the churches dealing with the issues that are going on now, especially within the black church. I was expecting to see more and more leaders of the faith to be out there supporting Black Lives Matter. I expected more black leaders and, reverends in the black church just itself to be
I thought
more
that kind of support was quite widespread, Moselle. Did I?
What it is if they're maybe televised, if they're high
profile folks?
official, high profile, then yes. But I'm talking about in the sense of the ones that are not really on TBN. They're very silent. They're actually quite on the very side of right. You had a whole bunch of people in the black church that actually voted for Trump, no matter all the stuff that came out about him. And they voted for him again because of abortion issues, or they didn't feel a woman should be in a place of leadership. They decided to apply their doctrine beliefs onto that. They're anti-vaccine. They feel it's the mark of the beast. And we're just, and it's.
Is this happening, Moselle? Are you speaking from personal experience? Are you talking about a black church that you attend, or are you reading about this?
They're members of a church that I used to attend to, and they are refusing to get the vaccine. They're refusing to talk about, they seem like, well, maybe Trump would have been better. You have a lot of black people who have migrated from the East Coast to the South, who are now taking on that right-wing agenda. I don't want my taxes paying for abortion. In the East Coast, never owned a gun, now own several guns living in the South. It's a weird mentality. They like to go ahead and bring up the Tuskegee Airmen as their excuse for not getting the vaccination. You'll hear they'll ask for the tithes and offering. They'll tell you not to commit sin, but they will not tell you to go out and get vaccinated.
That's very, very strange. There was a concerted effort by the Russian trolls during the 2020 and 2016 campaigns to target the black community, to target African Americans, specifically with the mention, in the 2016 campaign, with these videos of Hillary with her super predator comment. And I wonder if that targeting of that community is still ongoing, by countries outside the United States who would like to see us fail. I don't know, but Moselle, thanks for the call. That's fascinating.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And kind of sad. I mean, I could tell you stories about crazy in the white church, too. Isn't it a shame that we have, anyway.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten thinks economic debt links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around, and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com.
Masterclass.
50 seconds of music there. In fact, it's still going on. There we go. Okay, we're back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Let's see here. There was a story that I was going to. Well, let's pick up your phone calls here. It's as we're moving along. It's 35 minutes past the hour. Michael in Memphis, Tennessee. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Good talking to you again. Your last caller, I think her name was Mozella, and she was just touching on the black vote. My church asked me to be a deacon. The church that I went to, they asked me to be a deacon, and we had a conversation. I had a conversation with the deacon. I said, "You guys don't want me to be a deacon. A, I cuss way too much for you guys. B, I disagree with the black church on a lot of things. Tom, the reason Donald Trump got so much of the black vote is the same reason a lot of Republicans get the black vote. How you get the black vote here in Memphis, Tennessee, and in the South, you mentioned two things, abortion and homosexuality.
Yeah.
If you were against those two things, as a deacon, I could go home, beat my wife, cheat on her, and have a baby. As long as I don't abort the baby, I can still be a deacon.
Yeah.
That sounds extreme, but this is how it comes across to them.
Yeah.
And a lot of these people vote. They're no different than these dirt poor people, these dirt poor white people with these MAGA hats on. Go to Mar-a-Lago and see what Trump let you in from your trailer park.
Right, exactly.
No, he won't.
No, and Michael, by the way, this is
he won't let black folks in.
Yeah, and the same dynamic is happening in the Latinx or Hispanic community, where abortion and homosexuality have become big issues because Catholicism condemns them, and it's these wedge issues that Republicans use, and they're just like absolutely adamant about this is where we stand. And I suppose you could respect that if they really believed that, but I'm guessing that a lot of Republicans, if their daughter got raped and was impregnated, would be looking for an abortion clinic pretty damn fast. Or if one of their kids came out as gay, would not disown them. Or if they did, frankly, they're despicable people. But, they just haven't had that experience yet, haven't even imagined that experience, and therefore they're there. Michael, I don't know what to add to that. Did you want to put a punctuation mark at the end of that before I move along?
It's sad that you're not going to change these people's minds because they think it's the right thing. And it's skewed when they can no longer call themselves a part of family values.
Yeah, I get it.
Because the truth doesn't matter, and that's the sad thing. You guys talked about the 9/11 commissions and history. The truth doesn't matter to these people, so it really doesn't do any good to tell it to them.
Yeah, totally get it. Michael, thank you for the call. Ben in Portland. Hey, Ben, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good.
I just wanted to express a comment and a sort of a concern, given this recent ruling with Andrew Brown. It's, undoubtedly going to sort of inch the powder keg closer to the open flame as far as protests go here. I just wanted to get your opinion on Ted Wheeler's recent comments about how, citizens should essentially profile people for wearing black, report them to the police. And as somebody who does wear all black and may hold similar ideologies, obviously anti-fascist, that sort of brings back memories of living in rural New Hampshire and being targeted by the police for doing that very same thing. I just wanted to sort of get your opinion on that.
So are you of the opinion that smashing windows is a good thing?
Absolutely not. No, I don't agree with this destruction of property. I'm certainly not going to shed a tear over a Starbucks window. I'm all about protecting small businesses.
So if you disagree with, but the point that I think Ted Wheeler is making, and this is an issue that is not unique to Portland, but it's a big issue here. The point that Ted Wheeler is making is that the folks who are, back when I was probably your age, back when I was in SDS back in the 60s, some of them were referred to as Trotskyites or whatever, or anarchists. Their theory was you have to destroy a society and rebuild it from scratch. You can't, it is so fundamentally corrupt. The foundation of this country is so fundamentally corrupt The foundations of capitalism are so fundamentally corrupt that you literally can't patch it, you can't build on it, you can't repair it, you have to destroy it. And I had good friends, and one of them, in fact, went off and joined the Weather Underground and ended up in prison for over a decade because she was blowing buildings up and killed somebody, and unintentionally. And that there are people who believe that you have to tear it down, and those people have and it's a small number of people, in Portland it's probably a couple hundred people, but they have adopted wearing all black as essentially their uniform, and then they go out and smash buildings to tear it down, right? And what would you have Mayor Wheeler do?
But to that point, Tom, what if I was assembled as a peaceful protester, dressed in black, not necessarily with the quote-unquote anarchist people, and I was targeted, say, by a federal agent, bum rushed by the feds, and arrested and put in an unmarked vehicle? I mean, you know how...
I would be horrified, as I think we all would. I mean, when Trump did that, that was such a violation of everything, that law or anything else stands for. But my point, Ben, is that the way that we dress, like it or not, is in part. I mean, obviously, sometimes we dress for comfort and for function. If you're going to play tennis or something, or you're going to go rock climbing. I mean, or you're going to go swimming. But generally speaking, the way we dress is a way of presenting to the world who we are. It's basically a uniform. And if you're going to show up in downtown Portland wearing camouflage with an AR-14 strapped over your chest, or if you're going to show up in downtown Portland dressed head to toe in all
like
black,
the right-wingers did last summer. Yeah,
exactly. Or if you're going, if you're going to show up dressed all in black, in either case, what you are essentially doing is making a political statement by the way you're dressed. And if you're, and the political statement part of that should be protected. But on the other hand,
so if I'm going to work, should I take into consideration what I'm wearing so that I don't get harassed by the police?
This is where I was going to finish that sentence when you interrupted me.
Okay.
And that is it's context specific. If you are, if you're wearing camouflage and carrying an assault rifle over your shoulder and you're going to a protest, that's a completely different thing than if you're going out into the forest to do target shooting, or if you're just driving around. If you're dressed all in black and you're having lunch with a friend in a restaurant, or you're going to school or something, that's a completely different thing than if you're on the streets while there are people who are dressed all in black who are smashing windows because they think that the only way you can fix a broken system, a corrupted system, and there's no doubt this system is broken and corrupted, their solution is burn it all down. And as long as you are basically identifying with that group of people, you shouldn't be surprised when somebody thinks that you're among them.
Right.
But like I said, there's a context situation.
I see your point. I absolutely see your point.
I recall people who dressed in black because Johnny Cash dressed all in black. I mean, for some people, it's a fashion statement. It's a But I would not want to be Ted Wheeler right now. I would not want to be in that position because it's really tough. He's trying to protect the rights of people to peacefully protest, and at the same time trying to weed out folks who are just hell-bent on property destruction as a political statement. And there was a time in my life when I actually thought perhaps property destruction as a political statement was a good idea. I no longer believe that.
Well, I'm just glad that Biden struck down Trump's executive order to be able to send feds here during a protest.
That was crazy. That was a violation of that was a violation of
human rights
basic
violation.
Federalism, yes, and human rights and cops without name badges and all these other things. But this is this larger issue of a. I'm lacking a word here, Ben. But just like within the conservative movement, you've got right-wing crazies who show up in camouflage with guns and sometimes kill people. In the progressive movement or in the Democratic movement, or whatever you want to call it, on the left. There are also people who are engaging in behaviors that probably most people on the left would disagree with. And it's like, what do we do about that? I don't have an easy answer. I think we need to be respectful. We should be having conversations about these things. I don't think we should be breaking windows. Ben, I got to run. Thanks a lot for the call. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. Welcome back. It's 45 minutes past the hour. And Jan in Shoreline, Washington. Hey, Jan, what's up?
What's up? Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Last night on one of the many MSNBC shows I listened to, somebody was being interviewed and was describing what the 1/6 Commission would involve. And the thing that just made my skin crawl was that it will sunset on December 31st of this year.
Right.
And that they will be looking at the security issues so that the Capitol buildings, in the Capitol buildings, so that what happened will be prevented, so that the staff and the legislators and the tourists are safe. They're not going to be looking back at anything.
Right, and that's my point. It's what we used to call kabuki theater. I don't know if that's now considered an anti-Japanese slur, but performance art. I mean, that's what it's going to be.
Right.
And that's why I'm personally opposed to it. It's why I've written op-eds saying we don't need a commission. These commissions have always been used to whitewash basically Republican crimes. I don't know how to say beyond that. So I'm with you.
I hadn't heard it from somebody who, was involved in the decision making.
Yeah, I think you and I might have seen the same segment, because that person also made the point that they were cutting, in order to satisfy the Republicans, they were cutting and pasting from the 9/11 Commission authorizing legislation into the January 6th authorizing legislation, copy. And that, that's just crazy.
Yeah.
That's just crazy. In my opinion.
Like, what's the point?
Yeah, exactly. It's feel-good stuff. Jan, I got to move along, but thank you. Spot on. I'm with you. Don in Portland. Hey, Don, what's on your mind today?
Oh, man, so much. I called because of the question about the Republican Party from some time ago, and I can give you a couple of things there. My grandmother, who was a red-blooded Republican up in Whatcom County. And when Reagan finally took over that party, she was so upset. She said, those damn birches have stolen my Republican Party.
So she was an Eisenhower Republican.
I have been given consolation to honest Republicans for what's happened to their party.
Yeah.
And so the question I have is, this is bigger philosophically, do we need competitive parties? And if we do, shouldn't they both have to submit to saying yes to the Pledge of Allegiance? They either believe in democracy, and this is a laboratory of democracy, but we don't need a laboratory of democracy with a virus of oligarchy powered by money using the system. It's like playing poker with Foghorn Leghorn.
Yeah.
I swear.
Well, and I
swear someone's cheating here,
Yeah, there you go.
The hand I dealt myself.
Yeah, no, I totally get it, Don, and a good Foghorn Leghorn there. We do need a Republican Party that is functional, that can represent that part of America that feels like they're not represented by the Democratic Party. But you're absolutely right. The Republican Party right now has been taken over by crazies. We used to have guardrails that protected against that, and the poison.
But I don't think we have good enough guardrails. I think we need cooperation, collaboration, and not.
The guardrails used to be the things that kept money out of politics, and the Supreme Court blew that up, and thus this big money coming into politics has been empowering the most crazy elements. These people in Congress, the hardcore right-wingers, the Jim Jordans, they're getting a ton of money from these right-wing billionaires. That's what's going on. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So there's a new study that has, this is not peer-reviewed, but it is in preprint. It is being peer-reviewed as we speak, where the scientists were looking at the ability of the COVID virus to jump from the human species. You know, it started with bats, and then it apparently went to pangolins and then to humans, to jump from humans to other species, which would be a big problem. If we can infect other mammals, you know, our cats and dogs, if we can infect rats or mice, who have traditionally been disease vectors for all kinds of things, from the bubonic plague to hantavirus, if we can infect them with this virus, we've got a whole brand new problem. And sure enough, they have found that these two variants, B351 and P1, both can infect mice in the laboratory. And they say this abrogation of the species barrier represents you know, a serious problem. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. 51 minutes past the hour. Yeah, past the hour. There we go. And RJ in Greenville, Michigan. Hey, RJ, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. If the Republicans are so afraid to do the right thing because their lives are being threatened, then the rest of us are all on the endangered list.
Yeah.
Okay? So
I think
that
that's
means
the
we
lesson.
need to be prepared to defend ourselves. Okay? Now, I believe our best defense is a good offense. And I think we need to shine the light of day on these vampires. Okay? What do you think of the idea of having the Democrats reinstate the Committee on Un-American Activities? And how about using the Joe McCarthy approach to investigate this unholy alliance between the Republicans, their PACs, and the Russians?
Wow. Well, and not just the Russians. I mean, they're in bed with the Saudis. Yeah. They're in bed with you know, the hard right in Israel. They're in bed with you know, I mean, it's
right, and they have made a deal with the devil, and the only way the American people are actually going to see that they have made this deal is to put it to the light of day. And if you think about how effective, dangerously effective, Joe McCarthy was to the Democratic Party and the labor union movement, liberals in general, if we could do the same thing to them, we could knock them back into the Stone Age because we did nothing wrong, or very, very little. A few people decided they were part of the Communist Party, which was their right.
Right, and what's so ironic is HUAC, you know, the House Un-American Activities Committee, the HUAC, was started out of the hysteria that there were communists in the State Department. And I don't know if John Stormer's book, None Dare Call It Treason, preceded or followed the House Un-American Activities Committee. But, you know, Joe McCarthy was the chairman in the Senate, and Bobby Kennedy was counsel to that committee. I mean, you know, Bobby friggin' Kennedy was their head lawyer, and you know, for a while. And they were actually seriously looking into the possibility that the Soviet Union, which represented, they believed, an existential threat to the United States, and a lot of Americans of good conscience believed that, whether that foreign country was, you know, had infiltrated the labor unions, the State Department, you know, fill in the blanks. And then McCarthy just took it in all these wacky directions and turned it into crazy town because basically the Russians hadn't infiltrated anything. They had a few spies here, but that was about it. And, you know, and even the Julius and Ethel Rosenberg thing was, I mean, yeah, that was, you know, Donald Trump's old buddy, the lawyer whose name is escaping me right now.
Cohen.
Yeah.
Cohen.
Yeah. Yeah, Roy Cohn, yeah.
Roy Cohn.
Yeah,
yep.
and you know, who was also involved with that committee. So let me think about that, RJ, and let me do a little research into the history of that, because I think you might be onto something.
Wasn't there also a committee, at least a partial committee or something, formed after the attempted coup on Roosevelt?
There was, and Roosevelt shut that down after 3 weeks. They held hearings for either 2 or 3 weeks, and Roosevelt shut it down because it was getting highly politicized, and he also was concerned that they might actually trigger another movement to assassinate him or to kidnap him, as Smedley Butler was hired to do, or they tried to hire him to do. RJ, let me look into this, and thank you for getting the brain cells going. Bill in New Rochelle, New York. Hey, Bill, you've got the last minute of the show. What's on your mind today?
How you doing, Tom? I was just wondering if there's any way that these states that are suppressing the vote all around the country, if there's any way that Congress can stop them from participating, especially in the Electoral College, if they're suppressing the vote.
There is no law that I know of that would facilitate that. H.R. 1, the For the People Act, now it's Senate Bill 1, SB 1, would eliminate most of the vote suppression tactics that they're using. It would outlaw most of those tactics and would guarantee a universal right to vote in the process, or, it's a kind of one and the same. So there's not a way to kick them out, basically, of the Electoral College or prevent their votes from being counted. There is a way.
Kick them out of the United States either, right? There's no. They can secede, but we can't toss them, right?
That's true. That's true. And even secession is pretty much never going to happen. I mean, America has become sufficiently left-right integrated, and there are secession movements in New Hampshire and Oregon and California, in Texas, that have been active for years and years and years, and they're still, broadly considered a joke. Bill, thanks for the call. Interesting question. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, same studio, God willing, knock wood. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It starts with you getting involved, getting active, participating in our democracy. There's a lot on the line right now. We need your help. Spread the good word. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code Tom. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say